he would patiently explain something of a very technical nature which he shouldn't have understood. When asked what he was raving about and why he was causing trouble by writing the president, John D. would say that he had been sensitized. "Last year when I was sick," John D. explained, "the doctor on the base gave me sulfanilamide. There is a fifth column in this country that is tied up with aliens. Selenium is being slipped into sulfa drugs, and this selenium lodges in the bones and makes the body receptive to extremely short waves, those in the waveband of the brain, similar to the waves that can be detected by the encephalograph. About 300,000 people in this country have been sensitized, and at least 7 secret radio stations have been set up in this country, and they are broadcasting to these sensitized persons, instructing them in the best way to perform acts of sabotage against our planet. These claims as given by the Dulce worker, John D., are incredible indeed, and could easily be dismissed as the ravings of a madman, if not for the fact that many others are saying basically the same thing, that there is a movement underway to bring the minds of the masses under the subjection of some alien force, whether through implantation or other means, and that these alien powers from all indications intend on bringing humanity under their control through such manipulations. Why would the controllers use the United States as the major target of their activity? We believe that this is due to the fact that the United States is a place that was originally intended by its founding fathers to be a refuge for peoples from all nations to come and work out their collective destinies free from the restrictions of prejudice and dictatorial or tyrannical rule, a land where all people could express their creativity and individual destinies without interference. This was their intention. However, it is obvious that the dream has not been fully realized because of collective and governmental compromise of the principle that all men are created equal. The United States, nevertheless, is unlike any other single nation. It is a melting pot and a place where not only international human societies on the surface converge and intermingle in a dramatic way, but apparently where human societies beneath or beyond the earth converge as well. For instance, according to various accounts, most non-surface human societies who are aware of Earth have their representatives walking among us in our society and to a lesser extent, other nations throughout the world. There is even the possibility presented by some accounts, however strange as this may seem, that the sauroids or reptilians themselves have their own chameleon-like human-appearing representatives walking among us, infiltrating our society, for the most part unknown for their true nature. We have mentioned a few cases previously. However, there is another account of a chameleon entity which may have attempted to infiltrate the Pentagon itself, in an effort to seize information about the United States plans for Star Wars or SD technology. The unconfirmed account alleged that such a creature was in fact apprehended after contact lenses it was wearing, while posing as a high military officer, fell out, revealing a strange eye arrangement and a vertically slit pupil. The creature was apprehended and studied, and found to possess a reptilian internal makeup. The apartment where the creature was staying was searched and numerous copies of sensitive documents relating to SD were discovered within, information which it was apparently sending on to its superiors. Though the United States, then, seems to be in essence a world scenario, if not a universal scenario in miniature, and therefore the conspiracy sees it as a most valuable prize. Therefore it would probably not be too far out to suggest that the war between the human and serpent races from all three realms converge in the United States and, to be more exact, within the vicinities of Mount Arculeta near Dulce, New Mexico, a major Earth base of the reptilian empire. The Panamint Mountains of California, a major Earth base of the Nordic Federation. And the real hotbed of interplanetary and cyber-electronic warfare, the Nevada test site. Linda Duder of Washington, New Jersey, whose letter appeared in a UFO research journal, and was later reprinted in Val Valerian's Leading Edge magazine, made the following unusual allegation. I liked the story of the Silver BB TSB, February 1990 issue. I also had one. I was about 9 years old when it started to bother me. I don't know when I got it, but it was under my skin on my midriff section, just below my right ribs. I went to the doctor and he sent me to the hospital to remove it. I saw when he put it in the tray, a little silver ball about 1/4 around, maybe smaller. I also still have the scar. Dr. Mundy, a therapist who speaks about contactees and abductees, Brenton, told us at a workshop one night about these silver bebs. Apparently they were a communication/tracking device. The ball was not given to me. The hospital kept it. Dr. Mundy told us that during this time period, the 1950s, the government informed all doctors and hospitals to be on the alert for these bebs. During the contactee era of the late 1950s and early '60s, a man by the name of Mel Noel made the rounds of the UFO circuit, describing his experiences as an Air Force line pilot whose top-secret mission involved the photographing of UFOs, both visible and cloaked craft, radar directing and infrared film being used for the latter. These encounters usually took place over the Rocky Mountains of Utah and Idaho, according to Noel, and throughout the years 1953 to 54. One of Noel's lectures was delivered during that period to a huge crowd at the Giant Rock UFO convention held in the Mojave Desert near 29 Palms, California. For several years Noel was out of the news, until in the early 1990s, that is, when he reappeared stating that Noel was merely a pseudonym, and implying that because of greater present-day awareness of the UFO phenomena he could more easily use his real name of Guy Kirkwood. Kirkwood later appeared on the premiere UFO Contact episode of the Fox Network's Sightings series in the early 1990s. Kirkwood described an almost identical account as was given by Noel. Kirkwood's, or Noel's single quote, commanding officer during the operation had allegedly established radio contact with the human occupants of alien craft, who were rather attractive in appearance and could even pass themselves off as Americans if they were to walk the streets of any large city. His commanding officer later claimed that he had physical contacts with these craft. These human-like aliens claimed during a radio conversation between themselves and the commanding officer, a conversation which Noel and his 3 co-pilots were allowed to listen in on, that they were from underground cities beneath other planetary bodies in the Sol system, as well as from underground cities within the Earth itself. They claimed that these colonies or societies were affiliated together through a central tribunal on or below the moons of Saturn. In Kirkwood's own words, in reference to this communication, they made the statement that our scientists had made statements based upon theories that life cannot and therefore does not exist on the other planets in this system, and they said that they were confirming those statements. He said, life does not and cannot exist on these other planets. It is all inside the planets, it is all in the interior, just as the house of the Lord. This is the house of the Lord we live in, the interior of the planet. Kirkwood also stated, they went into a number of other things that may or may not be important. By discussion with legal advice, much of this, I can only discuss about 10% of what took place. This last statement probably had something to do with his security clearance. However, one of the most interesting things about the case was that almost a month after Kirkwood's commanding officer informed him and his friends that he was being allowed to join the Alien Society, his plane disappeared off the eastern coast without a trace. Kirkwood/Noel is convinced that they took him. At one point during the contactee period, Noel even claimed that he could arrange for rides on UFOs, suggestive that he might have had later physical encounters with these space beings. Researcher John Keel once had dinner with Noel in a restaurant in New York City, and Keel noticed that Noel did hang around people, and especially women who were very exotic looking, and Keel was convinced that their conversation was being monitored, possibly by CIA types. In the mid-1980s, a Canadian woman by the name of Joan Howard wrote a privately published book, titled The Space, or Something, Connection. We refer to it here because it dealt with some experiences which she, or rather her husband, had shortly after she came to America from Britain. In fact, Joan devoted an entire chapter to her husband's account, which involved some incidents that took place while he was doing some field work for a certain company, which required a great deal of activity in the out-of-doors. During his employment with this company, he and his co-workers had to travel through some relatively unpopulated terrain in West Virginia, particularly in the regions between Newville in Braxton County, and Helvetia in Randolph County, or rather the general region in and around the northern part of Webster County. During their travels through the forests and wilderness, and the rolling hills mountains of West Virginia, he had encountered some very strange things, and heard accounts of strange cavern-related experiences from the locals. At one point, he claimed, their group ran across what appeared to be a pipe sticking up from the ground far from the nearest town. There was no other sign of civilization or anything man-made for miles in either direction, yet here was this large pipe or tube sticking straight up from the ground. But the most remarkable thing was that a flame was shooting out of the pipe as if it were burning some type of gas. They never found out just what it was. Also, in the same general area, they explored caverns which contained some very strange things. One of the caverns had strange hieroglyphic-like writing on its walls, and others claimed that they heard what sounded like faint voices, and also machine-like sounds moving underground, as if they were emanating from beyond the walls of the caverns, or from their unexplored depths. 2 men, he claimed, bedded down one night in front of a certain cave which contained a very deep, unexplored chasm some ways inside. The next morning one of the men woke up and found that his partner had disappeared, and no trace was ever found of him. This particular cave, by the way, had been known as a place of unusual happenings, and a place to stay away from. Some even went so far as to call it Satan's lair. Whatever the case may be, it may provide an answer to the man's disappearance. One of the most remarkable accounts that Joan's husband heard involved a man who claimed that, while exploring the labyrinthine depths of a particular cavern in the area, he had suddenly come face to face with a woman. She was attractive yet completely devoid of hair, such as someone who might have been subjected to radiation poisoning. The woman, who spoke a language completely foreign to the man, tried for some time to communicate. After they found that they were not getting anywhere, they departed and went their separate ways. Joan Howard also claims to have had contacts with dwarfish beings since she was a small child, although her experiences make it unclear whether these occupants were human or not. She does state, however, that poltergeist-type manifestations often accompanied her UFO experiences, suggesting that the occupants, whether humanoid or sauroid, were involved with the darker side. She did warn potential researchers to be suspicious of any alien group which might attempt to contact them, encouraged them to prove if their claims are true, and always to keep a cold, keen, analytical mind. Stan Deyo was one of many Air Force cadets during the 1960s who dreamed of serving his country as an Air Force pilot. That was until Deyo learned that something strange was going on in the Air Force Academy where he was stationed. The anonymous intelligence community insider, Commander X relates, because of what he discovered while an unwilling guinea pig in certain experiments that were secretly being conducted by a covert organization working within the military, Stan Deyo had to flee the United States for a new home halfway around the world. Running as far as he could, the bearded scientist ended up in Perth, Australia, where he surfaced to tell his incredible saga of a conspiracy so sinister that it doesn't seem possible that something like this could actually transpire in the birthplace of George Washington, Abe Lincoln or John F. Kennedy. Deyo had enlisted into the United States Air Force and was sent for special training to the highly prestigious Air Force Academy located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We were the elite from all over America, especially selected for a secret purpose we knew nothing about, he told People magazine, an Australia weekly news magazine not to be confused with the celebrity profile magazine of the same name published in the US. They got control of our minds when we were asleep and fed us the most advanced physics for months on end. Then some of us began to realize something was happening to our minds and we rebelled. After 2 years, they failed the entire class, 180 of us. We knew too much. I'm speaking out now because I believe the world should know what they're up to, as well as for my own protection. As Deyo explains it, the 60s were a turbulent period even as far as the United States government was concerned. For some unexplainable reason, Stan Deyo found himself along with his classmates in the middle of an intelligence war between the FBI and the CIA, with the CIA bound and determined to keep the lid on a brand new form of technology directly related to UFOs. The CIA, in conjunction with military-industrial big business, has for a period of several years been in collusion, Deyo alleges, on findings that center around the development of a type of discourse saucer-shaped, anti-gravity machine that originated out of alien technology. According to Deyo's scenario, though the United States is worried that sooner or later they will run out of conventional fuel sources and that the elite and powerful will need a revolutionary technology in order to survive and no doubt maintain their control over the populations of the Earth. So they contacted General Electric, Sperry Rand and Bell Aircraft to spearhead a drive to develop this new technology, which can whirl a disc-like craft through interplanetary space at thousands of miles a second using the minds of the craft's crew members to navigate the Earth-made UFOs. This is where Deyo's training was supposedly to come in handy. Because of his intelligence level, he was to be made one of the ship's pilots as soon as his mental capabilities had been stretched through hypnosis and an advanced form of electronic mind control. Commander X continues. One of the most astounding things Deyo said, and this was almost 10 years ago, that is around the late 1970s and early '80s, Branton, was that he felt one of the staunchest supporters of this radically new anti-gravity technology was none other than the late William P. Lear, John Lear's father. At the time, Lear Sr. was quoted by the Associated Press as having said, "I can't help but feel flying saucers are real, because of numerous manifestations over long periods of time with many simultaneous observations by reliable observers. And this is the clincher. There are now serious efforts in progress to prove the existence of anti-gravitational forces and to convert atomic energy directly to electricity. Commander X continues, for those who hold suspicions that John Lear might, at least sometimes, be responsible for dealing from the bottom of the deck, providing as much in the way of disinformation as valid information, we can't help but theorize about the significance of the above quote attributed to his father, and the possibility that some of what John Lear is telling us is meant to steer our attention toward aliens, rather than look right under our very noses at an earthly technology that may be advanced beyond what we are currently taught is achievable through modern-day science. We wonder if perhaps there isn't to be found substantiation behind the rumor that Lear Aircraft Company, a firm that John's dad founded, is directly involved in some sort of research and development project involving anti-gravity and the manufacturing of UFOs made right here on Earth. One possible scenario is that John Lear found out about this top-secret project, perhaps while eavesdropping, and this is his way of spilling the beans without implicating his father or anyone else as the source. In 1990, researcher Val Valerian released a peculiar document which was sent to him by another researcher. The document is actually a list of several military personnel. However, the strange thing about this document was the title heading. Some researchers believe that within the deepest levels of the government is an ongoing covert space program utilizing some very remarkable aerospace and propulsion technologies. However, the very nature of this program, the clandestine and possibly illegal means by which it is funded, as well as the possible means by which they came across this technology, has apparently led the secret government into keeping these activities one of the world's top secrets, and apparently they have enforced this cover-up, as John Lear says, with deadly force. Perhaps one of the most important reasons for the secrecy, according to some, is that some groups within the secret government have allegedly, in the face of superior alien technology, surrendered to a malevolent alien race and have become their agents on Earth. Is it also possible, as many researchers and prominent military, government and industrial personnel are actually confirming, that the secret government is utilizing this advanced super technology which they have hidden from the public to carry out a clandestine space program involving not only manned flights to the moon, but also manned bases on the moon and, some claim, even Mars as well? There appears to be enough mounting evidence to cause the public to at least consider the possibility of these claims. Actually, if one carefully examines all of the various claims and how they merge together in synchronicity, and if one studies the various theories and arguments concerning Einstein's unified field theory and the apparent underlying connection between electromagnetism, gravity waves, and other unified field forces, such a scenario involving a fleet of top-secret government anti-gravity craft would not be outside the realm of possibility. The document referred to above contains in the title heading both the terms Starfleet International and United Federated Planets. Why would such a statement appear on a military document? Could it be that, although perhaps somewhat presumptuously, a secret group of astronauts constantly travel back and forth from ultra-secret bases on or below the Earth, the Moon, and Mars, and have in anticipation of an ever-growing interplanetary network named this organization Starfleet International and/or the United Federated Planets? Val Valerian gives the following introduction and story behind the document. Researcher George Andrews forwarded this puzzle to us. From the introduction, it might seem that this thing was complete bunk. There it might have stayed, except that we traced 11 people on the list to actually being in the military. What does it mean? The following introduction is given by George Andrews, a friend who wishes to remain anonymous, who lives in a large city, recently woke about 3 a.m. with a strong but apparently irrational impulse to get dressed and to go to an all-night photostat place. As she was entering, she noticed a man dressed in a Navy officer's uniform who was just leaving, who threw some papers into the trash barrel near the door. She made her copies and was about to leave and had another impulse to retrieve what the Navy officer had thrown away. She came up with these pages. Under normal circumstances, the news that the United States Navy has a flying disc named the U.S. Excalibur and U.S. Concorde, Brenton, operated by a crew of 4, would be cause for celebration. However, unless this achievement is the result of the collaboration of the Greys. Andrews goes on to suggest that they might, because of their collaboration with the Greys, be forced to take part in offensive attacks against the Blondes, who have allegedly had ancient conflicts with the Greys. The introduction goes on to state that those names which appear with an X are people who have actually been traced to the military. Take special note of names like Ferguson, Caskey, Taylor, Burrell, Stevens, and Miller, which are repeated more than once throughout the list. Possible signs of nepotism? George Andrews suspects that Starfleet International consists of human military personnel only, while the United Federated Planets may somehow tie in with the non-human entities such as the Serpent race or the Greys. However, Andrews' theory that this particular governmental establishment has collaborated with the Greys is yet to be confirmed. There is a possibility that the UFP involves interaction with the federated human cultures in this small corner of the galaxy. Let us hope that this is the case, if the following information is true. There is evidence in fact that certain constituted government officials who are loyal to the American Constitutional Republic, as confirmed by Guy Kirkwood and others, have secret alliances with the Nordics, where the secret government collaborators who are loyal to the Bavarian Roman Empire tend to collaborate with the Saurian Greys, etc. Below is a reproduction of the document, United Federated Planets. Starfleet International. Use. S. Concord NCC 1989. Crew roster. Crew member. SF expiration. Serve. Number. Co. Mike Ferguson, SFC St/Mac. June 1990 *. SCMC-8901-0002.LT. Laura Ferguson, SFC. June 1990 @ SCM-8901-0007.LCDR. Harlan Stevens, SFC. September 1989 @ SCSS-8906.23.ENS. Rebecca Burand, SFC. September 1989 @ SCS-8902-0004.MAJ. Mike West, SFC Staff/Mac. UFP only. SCMC-8901-0004.LT. Katrina Caskey, SFC. November 1989 @ SCE-8906-0005.2LT. Bob Burrell, SFMC. November 1989 @ SCMC-8906-0003.CMDR. Bob Tompkins, SFC. December 1989 @ SCE 8906-0002. SGM. Ray Chambers, SFMC. December 1989 @ SCMC 8903-0008X. Ensign Ron Caskey, SFC. January 1990 @ SCE-0906-0005.LT. Deborah McClary, SFC. January 1990 @ SCSS 8906-0004X. MSG. Ivan Goodman, SFMC. January 1990 @ SCMC-8904-0001.CS. Crystal Ferguson, SFC. January 1990 @ SCM 8906-0011X. MDSM. Philippe Baudet, SFC. January 1990 @ SCM 8906-0009. ANS. Everett New, SFC. February 1990 @ SCE-8906-0007.MSG. John Higgins, SFMC. February 1990 @ SCMC 8906-0010X. WO3. Doug Taylor, SFMC. March 1990 @ SCMC 8906-0001X. CS. Rose Taylor, SFC. March 1990 @ SCS-8906-0012.SB1. Amanda Taylor, SFC. March 1990 @ SCMC 8906-0001X. ANS. Kelly Maddox, SFC. March 1990 @ SCSS-8906-0008.Radden. Ann Miller, SFC staff. May 1990 * SMC 8901-0006X. LTJG. Sharon Burrell, SFC. May 1990 at SCSS-8906-0014.wo4. Chuck Graham, SFMC. May 1990 at SCMC 8906-0001-X. PO1. Dean King, SFC. May 1990 at SCO 0906-0015-X. PO. Chuck Stevens, SFC. May 1990 at SCE-0906-0015.SP1 Willie Stevens, SFC. May 1990 at SCE-8906-0017.LTJG. Jason Mars, SFC. June 1990 at SCO-8906-0018.LTJG. Charles Finch 3, SFC. UFPonly.LTJG. James Cavanis, SFC. UFPonly. SCS-8908-0004.WO. Terry Miller, SFC. UFPonly. SCS 8908-0004-X. WO. Deanna Winslet, SFC. UFPonly. SCM-8907-0005.SFC. Richard Parker, SFMC. UFPonly. SCMC 8907-0004-X. WO. Steve Wilkes, SFC. UFPonly. Lieutenant Russell Knights, SFC. UFPonly. SCSS-8908-0006.WO. Shelley Savage. UFPonly. SCM-8907-0006.CPL. Chuck Fair. UFPonly. SCMC-8908-0005.CPL. John Plant. UFPonly. SCMC-8908-0007.WO. Karen Sullivan. October 1990 at SCC-14522-12.WO. Kelly Spangler. October 1990. SCC-14508-12. Page 2. S. Concord NCC 1989 Crew Roster. At LTJG. Janet Kelly. SCC. CPL. Marcus Malone. UFPonly. SCMC. WO. Alan Sherwood. UFPonly. SCO-8908.02.CS. Kahuna Kite. UFPonly. SCE-8908-0003.spec. Vincent Lynn. UFPonly. SCE-8906.23.WO. Glenn Lowe. UFPonly. SCM-8907-0002.WO3. Mike Weir. UFPonly. SCMC. Asterisk denotes Vice Fleet Admiral for UFP. Denotes dual membership in UFP and Starfleet. Asterisk denotes Vice Fleet Admiral for UFP. Denotes dual membership in UFP and Starfleet. Note, in the original document, 4 of the above names were indicated as being members of the crew of the U.S. Excalibur. Brampton. Peer Research 105 Saraway. Suite 176. Milpitas, California. 95,035 made the following comments in one of their files, which consist of collections of large amounts of documents and research related to UFOs. Ramifications of MJ-12. If the U.S. test fluidiscon was successful, what's to prevent them from using the same saucer to transport man and materials to the Moon and Mars? They would also be in a position to exploit the archaeological artifacts of the pyramids and Sphinx in the Valley of Elysium on Mars. Also, they could recover artifacts of previous races on the surface of the Moon. With the aid of NASA satellites, they could map and mine the rare Earth, Moon, Mars minerals at the expense of the taxpayers, while at the same time claim that we have nothing better in our technology than space shuttles, rocket power. If the Canadian Geomagnetic Project was successful with their free energy geomagnetic motor, then why haven't we seen free energy engines for the home and auto instead of hearing about oil shortages? If the President of the USA is allowed only certain appointed staff by the Constitution and Congress, Are the members of MJ-12 outside of the limits of the Constitution, or did Congress give the President the power to set up a secret government non-elected without the public right to vote on this choice of the governing of the various military and non-military branches of the United States? When the MJ-12 use non-appropriated funds for their secret operations, are they using money from the black budget? If so, when did we cast a vote stating that any branch of the government can use the taxpayers' money without giving an account or being held accountable for it? When MJ-12 refused to grant FOIA requests because of national security reasons, is it because the USA won't be secure against foreign earthly powers, alien powers, or against the wrath of a misled and deceived United States public, the voters? Can laws be passed to guarantee that various branches of the government will be held accountable for the shredding of classified documents? How about passing laws to guarantee stiff jail sentences for underlings, secretaries, lower-rank personnel that carry out the command to shred confidential files? If the top of the mountain is corrupt, what about the foundation that was later raised under it? If a secret government is illegal, what about all of the secret projects it started and maintains control of? It's one thing to classify advances in technology as secret, but it's quite different to classify non-elected government as secret. When the non-accountable government, non-accountable by reason of being secret, passes military laws that affect all branches of government, military and non-military, are the laws legal or non-constitutional? If the JMP, Justice for Military Personnel, letter is true, are the actions of the CIA illegal as used against citizens of the USA? Isn't the purpose of the CIA to protect citizens against foreign threats? If the MIBs exist according to the documents, what has happened to the conscience of the military personnel that carry out false ID missions against private citizens? Why are military personnel carrying out higher-up orders to impersonate branches of government they neither represent or have rank in? Is this patriotism or blindness? In the April 1963 issue of Search magazine, Will Carson and Jeannie Joy, in their regular column Prying into the Unknown, related the following incredible story, which involved an apparent encounter with an unknown race below the Mojave Desert region. It has always been a mystery to us in the first place how Mr. and Mrs. P.E. can find and afford the time to do the sort of things most of us only dream of doing. After knowing them for more than 15 years, it is inconceivable to suspect their integrity or sanity, and yet they impose the following excise upon our credulity. While exploring for petroglyphs in the Casa Diablo vicinity of Bishop, California, Mr. and Mrs. P.E. came upon a circular hole in the ground, about 9 feet in diameter, which exuded a sulfurous steam and seemed recently to have been filled with hot water. A few feet from the surface the shaft took a tangent course which looked easily accessible and, upon an impulse with which we cannot sympathize, the dauntless, armed only with a flashlight, forthwith crawled down into that hole. At a depth we've failed to record, the oblique tunnel opened into a horizontal corridor whose dripping walls, now encrusted with minerals, and could only have been carved by human hands, countless ages ago. Of this the E's felt certain. The end of the short passage was blocked by what seemed to be a huge doorway of solid rock which, however, wouldn't yield. The light of their flash was turned to a corner where water dripped from a protuberance, which proved to be a delicately carved face, distorted now by the crystallized minerals, and from whose gaping mouth water issued. As Mr. and Mrs. E stood there in silent awe, wondering what lay behind that immovable door, the strangest thing of all happened. But our chronology will not be incorrect if we wait till they return to the surface before revealing this, for now the water began gushing from the carved mouth and from other unseen ducts elsewhere in that cave and rising at an alarming rate. They hurried to the surface, and in less than half an hour there was only a quite ordinary appearing pool of warm mineral water on the desert floor. "Do you know," Mrs. E said to her husband, "while I stood down there I heard music, the strangest, most weird music I'd ever heard. But it seemed to come from everywhere at once, or inside my own head. I guess it was just my imagination." Mr. E turned pale. "My God," he said. "I thought it was my imagination, but I heard it, too, like music from some other world. Why do they call that rock formation near where these had their strange experience Casa Diablo, the Devil's House? And why did the Indians name that area Inyo, dwelling place of the Great Spirit?" The following is a quote from Matt Spetalnik's article, "Is Anybody Out There?" NASA looks for real ETs, in Reuters magazine, October 5, 1992, at least 70 times scientists have picked up radio waves that bore the marks of communication by beings from other worlds, but they were never verified, Frank Drake said. Through proposed projects such as SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which involves large arrays of radio dish receiving mechanisms to tune into cosmic radio waves, Drake and others hope to contact outside intelligences. However, if the incidents related by Forrest Crawford earlier in this file are correct, this has already occurred. If our tax dollars are going toward other SETI-type experiments, chances are that the public will not and never be officially told of the outcome, if they, once again, receive signals from other nearby stars. Such a disclosure might threaten the psychological control which the secret government has imposed on the nations. The secret government does not wish to allow planet Earth to become a member of a benevolent federation of human worlds, as the Federation policies would certainly condemn the horrendous power games which the Illuminati has used for centuries to keep mankind in its stranglehold of slavery. The Illuminati will only ally themselves with aliens such as the Reptilian/Greys and some branches of the Ashtar/Astarte network which has collaborated with the Illuminati, Nazis and Greys in the past that share their desire to wield absolute godlike empirical control of the planet. It is very likely that Frank Drake was somehow sold out to the Bavarian Roman Grey Illuminati serpent cult combine, when we consider his complicity with the international UFO cover-up. Incidentally, another possible use of radar dish antennas has been suggested by Kansas of Salt Lake City, Utah, who allegedly talked to a man who was involved in setting up top-secret underwater radio dishes for secret government projects. He claimed that many of these dishes were used to communicate with our bases on the Moon and Mars. If this is the case, could the SETI program be, to some extent, an extension of this? Death Valley, California and the Mojave Desert region, as we have indicated earlier, has been the site of numerous UFO sightings in the past. Some regard it as no less than a doorway into another world. The Paiute Indians, as we have also related, tell of a race of Grecian or Egyptian-like people with white robes, sandals, and long dark hair held back with a band, who thousands of years ago arrived in North America in large rowing sailing vessels. The Paiutes say that when Death Valley was still part of an inland sea connected to the Pacific Ocean through the Gulf of California, these Musuvs discovered an underground cavern system within the Panamint Mountains adjacent to the west edge of Death Valley, and within these vast caverns they built their civilization. To briefly review the Paiute account, the legend says that these ancient people landed their ships near or just below large quays or doors high up the eastern slope of the Panamints. However, after centuries the lake eventually dried up and disappeared, and as a result of this they developed new methods of reaching the world beyond. This, the Paiutes say, was when they began to experiment with the construction of silvery flying canoes. Whether there is any connection with the following account is uncertain, but in 1905 an airship flap was observed throughout Southern California. On August 2, 1905, J.A. Jackson, a well-known resident of Silshi, was out at 1:30 in the morning when a bright light appeared in the sky and headed for him. According to an account published in the Brawley, California, News on August 4, 1905. He watched it closely until behind the light there appeared the form of an airship, apparently about 70 feet in length, with a searchlight in front and several other lights aboard. The mysterious machine appeared to be propelled by wings alone and rose and fell as the wings flapped like a gigantic bird. Apparently there was no balloon attachment, as is usually the case with airships. Mr. Jackson, being close to the home of We Will See, woke him up in time to see the lights of the machine before it disappeared. The same night, H. Allett, postmaster at Imperial, was awakened from sleep by a bright light shining into his room. There was no moon, the light was thought to be fire, and Mr. Allett rose to investigate, but no fire was found. Looking at his watch, the time was discovered to be 1:30 o'clock and it is believed that the brilliant light was caused by the searchlight from this mysterious airship. A craft of almost identical description was reported only 4 years later in the December 15, 1909 issue of the Arkansas Gazette. A.W. Norris of Mibelval, road overseer of District No. 8, is of the opinion that an airship passed over his residence at about 10 o'clock Monday night, December 12. Mr. Norris states that he was standing in his doorway when a strange light appeared, apparently about 300 feet above him, traveling south at a rapid rate of speed and disappeared a moment or two later in the darkness. He said that the light had the appearance of a searchlight similar to those used on automobiles, and it rose and fell like a bird in flight. The night was cloudy, which precludes the possibility of the light having been a star or any atmospheric phenomena. Airships of this description were apparently common following the turn of the century, but few if any of this particular type of craft have been reported after the period just described, 1900 to 1910, etc. Just because an airship appears over California or Arkansas does not necessarily indicate that the airship was native to either one of those areas. However, there are nonetheless many evidences, as indicated elsewhere in this file, that the Mojave Desert Panamint Mountains, Death Valley areas were apparently, in ancient times, a cradle, possibly one of many, for an early civilization which later developed an advanced form of technology. And having done so in relative secrecy, they were unhindered by the uncivilized tribes outside of their domain who continued in their relatively ignorant lifestyles. Perhaps the most remarkable confirmation of this appears in Berkeley's biography Death Valley Men, Macmillan Company, New York, 1932, which also dealt with alleged caverns within the Panamint MTS region. If indeed the Panamint Mountains are an ancient doorway to an advanced and hidden human civilization, then one must recognize that it, as well as any of its national treasures, should be, as should be any national border on the face of the earth, considered the legal territory of those who have possessed it since ancient times. Borders need not be entirely horizontal, but they can be vertical as well. Unwelcome intrusions into such an undiscovered country might be dealt with as in any other nation on earth, and one should approach such territories with caution. Unlike other areas where subterraneous and malevolent anti-human or reptilian activity is alleged to exist, the independence and national sovereignty of those subsurface regions where hidden human colonies reside should be honored as one would honor any national border on the face of the earth. Even if an archaeological discovery is found which belonged to the ancestors of an ancient culture which still exists, that discovery should be the property of that culture alone. One of the arguments for making public sensitive information on various exterran and subterranean cultures would be to protect those human cultures from the secret government's machinations, by bringing international public support in favor of that hidden culture and its right to maintain their sovereignty and independence. If the secret government knowingly violates another country's rights, every other independent country in the world would feel threatened as well. And in the case of the various hidden underground centers utilized by the reptilian greys, the public knowledge of this would be necessary to maintain the national security of each independent nation which might otherwise be infiltrated via implantation, or other forms of mind control, which inevitably leads to other forms of control, political, spiritual, educational, economical, etc. Even if various subsurface human cultures were driven out of their underground homes by non-human malevolence, and if those territories are somehow regained in a possible future counter-invasion against the reptilian incursions, then those territories should still rightfully and legally belong to or return to the human cultures who formerly possessed them. Supposing there is a counter-invasion in the future, there would no doubt still be much territory left over once the reptilians are driven out and/or destroyed, territory which might not be claimed by a cave-dwelling tribe, colony or culture. Such underground systems could then be claimed by an outside government if they felt the need to expand their own territory. According to some accounts, though the United States government does know about many such underground systems, and having found many of them unoccupied in past explorations, have claimed them for their own. Unfortunately, even in the case of smaller underground repositories of ancient artifacts, there are indications that many ancient treasures have been melted down by prospectors, tomb robbers, etc., in order to gain the metal value of the gold, silver and other precious metals, out of which the ancient artifacts were formed, in order to prevent the state from taking their find away. In doing so, such plunderers have destroyed the immense historical and archaeological value of such treasures in exchange for the relatively pitiful metallic value. Many of the ancient Egyptian treasures fell prey to such vandals and grave robbers in ancient times. Even if one does not agree with the religious symbolisms behind such artifacts, their historical and archaeological value makes them nevertheless worthy of preservation. The only reason that King Tut's single-quote treasures have made such an impact, even though he was a minor king, is that these treasures were among the very few which were not discovered by grave robbers and melted down for their metal content. There is no telling how much historical information about ancient cultures has been forever lost by such careless actions. Hopefully humankind has reached the point of maturity where the discovery of such treasures in the future will result in a cooperative scientific study of the ancient artifacts for the benefit of all, rather than the violence, death and betrayal which has often resulted in the past through the mistakes of selfish treasure hunters fighting each other for the booty. According to some accounts, many of these ancient sites still await discovery, finds which may make King Tut's tomb look insignificant by comparison. As we have implied, Just as one should honor the ancient archaeological sites of existing cultures, in the same way one should honor the national sovereignty of another human culture itself. To fail to do so would be in essence to throw away any legal argument a nation might have for the protection of their own national sovereignty. Case in point, the Reptilian or Draconian Empire with its major Earth center in the complex below India, and the human Illuminati empires on and beyond Earth, which apparently have a secret alliance with each other, have so interfered in the sovereignty of nearly every nation on Earth, and have done so to the point that they can no longer legally claim any rational defense against any nation which would decide to abuse their sovereignty. The Reptilian Empire is of course a problem in itself, having been at war via overt attacks or covert manipulation against the majority of humanity on and above Earth since ancient times, and apparently, from the accounts given throughout this and other files, does not even acknowledge humankind's right to this planet, nor even their right to exist. Paiute Indian legends say that the people of the Panamanians long ago left their ancient city within the mountains of California and moved most of their civilization into still deeper cavern levels, and, according to still other accounts, to colonies beyond the confines of planet Earth itself. Although these Havemasuves may be benevolent in comparison to some cultures inhabiting the surface of the planet, they nevertheless, according to the documentation in this and other databases, have the ability and technology to defend their borders and their loved ones from any potential enemy. In his chapter Old Gold, the author of Death Valley Men, Burke Lee, relates the allegedly true account of two prospectors who claimed to have discovered this ancient, abandoned city within huge caverns inside the heart of the Panamint Mountains. Take special note of the incredible similarity between this account and the one given to the Navajo Ogamate by an old Paiute sage, as recorded in the article Tribal Memories of the Flying Saucers. We will take up the story where two Death Valley residents by the name of Bill and Jack are having a conversation with two prospectors, Thomason and White, from whom the author apparently learned the details of the following discussion, if not presented the discussion himself. Thomason looked from Jack to Bill and asked, "How long have you men been in this country?" Jack spoke before Bill had a chance. "Not very long," said Jack quietly. Bill glanced curiously at Jack but said nothing. If Jack thought that 30 years was not very long, that was all right with Bill. Thomason said, "I've been in and out of the Death Valley country for 20 years. So has my partner. We know where there is lost treasure. We've known about it for several years, and we're the only men in the world who do know about it. We're going to let you two fellows in on it. You've been good to us. You're both fine fellows. You haven't asked us any questions about ourselves, and we like you. We think you can keep a secret, so we'll tell you ours." Jack blew smoke and asked, "A lost mine?" "No, not a mine," said Thomason. "A lost treasure house. A lost city of gold. It's bigger than any mine that ever was found, or ever will be." "It's bigger than the United States Mint," said White, with his voice and body shaking with excitement. "It's a city thousands of years old and worth billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Billions. Not millions. Billions." Thomason and White spoke rapidly and tensely, interrupting each other in eager speech. Thomason said, "We've been trying to get the treasure out of this golden city for years. We had to have help, and we haven't been able to get it. Everybody tries to rob us," put in White. "They all want too big a share. I offered the whole city to the Smithsonian Institution for $5 million, only a small part of what it's worth. They tried to rob us, too. They said they'd give me $1.5 million for a discovery that's worth $1 billion. He sneered. I had nothing more to do with them. Jack got up and found this plug of tobacco. He threw away his cigarette and savagely bit off an enormous chew. He sat down and crossed his legs and glowered at White as he worked his chew into his jaw. Bill's voice was meek as he asked, "And this place is in Death Valley?" "Right in the Panamint Mountains," said Thomason. "My partner found it by accident. He was prospecting down on the lower edge of the range near Wingate Pass. He was working in the bottom of an old abandoned shaft when the bottom fell out and landed him in a tunnel. We've explored the tunnel since. It's a natural tunnel like a big cave. It's over 20 miles long. It leads all through a great underground city, through the treasure vaults, the royal palace and the council chambers. And it connects to a series of beautiful galleries with stone arches in the east slope of the Panamint Mountains. Those arches are like great big windows in the side of the mountain and they look down on Death Valley. They're high above the valley now, But we believe that those entrances in the mountainside were used by the ancient people that built the city. They used to land their boats there." "Boats?" demanded the astonished Bill. "Boats in Death Valley?" Jack choked and said, "Sure, boats. There used to be a lake in Death Valley. I hear the fishing was fine." "You know about the lake?" Thomason pointed his blue chin at Jack. "Your geology would tell you about the lake. It was a long time ago. The ancient people who built the city and the caverns under the mountain lived on in their treasure houses long after the lake in the valley dried up. How long, we don't know. But the people we found in the caverns have been dead for thousands of years. Why? Those mummies alone are worth $1 million. White, his eyes blazing, his body trembling, filled the little house with a vibrant voice on the edge of hysteria. "Gold!" he cried. "Gold spears. Gold shields. Gold statues. Jewelry. Thick gold bands on their arms. I found them. I fell into the underground city. There was an enormous room, big as this canyon. 100 men were in it. Some were sitting around a polished table that was inlaid with gold and precious stones. Men stood around the walls of the room carrying shields and spears of solid gold. All the men, more than 100, had on leather aprons, the finest kind of leather, soft and full of gold ornaments and jewels. They sat there and stood there with all that wealth around them. They are still there. They are all dead. And the gold, all that gold, and all those gems and jewels are all around them. All that gold and jewelry. Billions." White's voice was ascending to a shriek when Thomason put a hand on his arm and White fell silent, his eyes darting about to the faces of those who sat around the table. Thomason explained quietly, "These ancient people must have been having a meeting of their rulers in the council chamber when they were killed very suddenly. We haven't examined them closely because it was the treasure that interested us, but the people all seem to be perfect mummies." Bill squinted at White and asked, "Ain't it dark in this tunnel?" "Black dark," said White, who had his voice under control again. His outburst had quieted him. "When I first went into that council room I had just some candles. I fumbled around. I didn't discover everything all at once like I'm telling you. I fell around over these men, and I was pretty near almost scared out of my head. But I got over that and everything was all right and I could see everything after I hit the lights." "Lights? There were lights?" It was Bill asking. "Oh, yes," said White. "These old people had a natural gas they used for lighting and cooking. I found it by accident. I was bumping around in the dark. Everything was hard and cold and I kept thinking I was seeing people and I was pretty scared. I stumbled over something on the floor and fell down. Before I could get up there was a little explosion and gas flames all around the room lighted up. What I fell over was a rock lever that turned on the gas, and my candle set the gas off. That was when I saw all the men, and the polished table, and the big statue. I thought I was dreaming. The statue was solid gold. Its face looked like the man sitting at the head of the table, only, of course, the statue's face was much bigger than the man's, because the statue was all in perfect size, only bigger. The statue was solid gold, and it is 89 feet, 6 inches tall." "Did you measure it?" asked Jack, sulkily, "or just guess at it?" "I measured it. Now you'll get an idea of how big that one room, the council room, is. That statue only takes up a small part of it." "Steady and evenly," Jack asked, "did you weigh the statue?" "No," said White. "You couldn't weigh it." Bill was puzzled. "Would you mind telling me how you measured it?" asked Bill. "With a sextant," said White. "I always carry a sextant when I'm on the desert. Then if I get lost, I can use my sextant on the sun or moon or stars to find myself on the map. I took a sextant angle of the height of the statue and figured it out later." "A sextant," said Bill, frowning heavily. Jack said, "It's a part of the church, Bill." "Never mind that. Tell us some more about this place. It's very interesting." Fred Thomason said, "Tell them about the treasure rooms." "I found them later." White polished his shining pate with a grimy handkerchief. "After I got the lights going I could see all the walls of this big room and I saw some doors cut in the solid rock of the walls. The doors are big as slabs of rock hung on hinges you can't see. A big rock bar lets down across them. I tried to lift up the bars and couldn't move them. I fooled around trying to get the doors open. I must have been an hour before I took a hold of a little latch like on the short end of the bar and the great bar swung up. Those people know about counterweights and all those great big doors with their bar locks. They must weigh hundreds of tons, are all balanced so that you can move them with your little finger, if you find the right place. Thomason again said, "Tell them about the treasure." "It's gold bars and precious stones. The treasure rooms are inside these big rock doors. The gold is stacked in small bars piled against the walls like bricks. The jewels are in bins cut out of rock. There's so much gold and jewelry in that place that the people there had stone wheelbarrows to move the treasure around." Jack sat up in sudden interest. "Wheelbarrows?" he asked. "We don't know how old they are," said Thomason, "but the stone wheelbarrows are there." "Stone wheelbarrows," marveled Jack. "Those dead men must have been very powerful men. Only very strong men could push around a stone wheelbarrow loaded with gold bars. The wheelbarrows must have weighed a ton without a load in them." "Yes," said Thomason, slowly, "the wheelbarrows are stone and of course they are very heavy but they are very easy to push around even with a load in them," White explained. "They're scientific wheelbarrows." "No," objected Jack in a low tone of anguish. "Yes," insisted White, pleasantly sure of himself. "A small boy could fill one of those stone wheelbarrows full of gold bars and wheel it around. The wheelbarrows are balanced just like the doors. Instead of having the wheel out in front so that a man has to pick up all the weight with his back, these wise people put the wheel almost in the middle and arranged the leverage of the shafts so that a child could put in a balanced load and wheel the barrow around." Jack's heart was breaking. He left the table and threw his chew out the door. He went over to the stove with his cup. "Anybody want more coffee?" he asked. No one did. Bill studied Thomason and White for several minutes. Then he asked, "How many times have you been in this tunnel?" "I've been there 3 times, said White. "That's counting the first time I fell in. Fred's been in twice. And my wife went part way in the last time we was in." Mrs. White stroked her blonde hair and said, "I thought my husband was romancing when he came home and told me what he found in the mountains. He always was a romancer. I was sure he was just romancing about this city he said he found. I didn't believe it until they took me into it. It is a little hard to believe, don't you think?" Bill said, "It sure is." Jack stirred sugar into his coffee and sat down at the table again. Bill asked, "Did you ever bring anything out of the cave?" "Twice," said Fred Thomason. "Both times we went and we filled out pockets with gems, and carried out a gold bar apiece. The first time we left the stuff with a friend of ours and we went to try and interest someone in what we'd found. We thought the scientists would be interested or the government. One government man said he'd like to see the stuff and we went back to our friend to get the gold and jewels and he told us he'd never seen them. And dared us to try to get them back. You see, he double-crossed us. We were in a little trouble at the time and the loss of that stuff just put us in deeper. We couldn't get a stake because we were having hard work making anyone believe us. So we made another trip out here for more proof. That time we brought out more treasure and buried it close to the shaft entrance to the underground city before we went back to the coast. I persuaded some university officials and some experts from the Southwest Museum to come out here with me. We got up on the Panamints and I could not find the shaft. A cloudburst had changed all the country around the shaft. We were out of luck. The scientists became unreasonably angry with us. They've done everything they can to discredit us ever since." Jack watched Thomason and White across the rim of his coffee cup. Bill said, "And now you can't get into your treasure tunnel. It's lost again. That's sure too bad." Thomason and White smiled. "We can get in all right," said Thomason in a genial voice his cold eyes did not support. Mrs. White smiled confidently and her husband bobbed his head. Thomason went on, "You've forgotten about the old boat landings on the Death Valley side of the Panamint Mountains. All we have to do is climb the mountain to the openings where the galleries come out of the city on the old lakeshore. Do you know the mountains along the west side of Death Valley?" "I've been down there," said Bill. Thomason turned to White. "How high do you think those galleries are above the bottom of Death Valley?" White said, "Somewhere around 4,500 or 5,000 feet. You looked out of them. What do you think?" "That's about right," agreed Thomason. "The openings are right across from Furnace Creek Ranch. We could see the green of the ranch right below us and Furnace Creek wash across the valley. We'll find those windows in the mountains, all right." "You going down there now?" asked Bill. "That's it," said White. "We were through with the scientists. We tried to make a present of our discovery to science because we thought they would be interested. But they tried to rob us, and then they laughed at us and abused us. Saying thanks and farewell, the treasure hunters left, promising to return, and drove in their car down to Emigrant Canyon towards Death Valley. Later that same afternoon, Burke Lee, the author of Death Valley Men, allegedly met the three of them on the floor of the valley. Their car was parked beside the road between Furnace Creek Ranch and the salt beds. The men were patching a tube. They did not need any help, so he wished them well and said goodbye and went on towards the southern part of the barren valley. He never saw Fred Thomason, Mr. White, nor his wife again, and 10 days later when he again visited Bill Colquhoun and Jack Stewart, they told him that they hadn't seen them since either. When another week went by and the proprietors of the lost city did not appear, the author and Bill made a trip down into Death Valley in their car and took along a pair of field glasses, hoping to see some sign of the explorers or of the windows or quays allegedly hid among the shadows of the eastern slope of the sun-blistered Panamints. They failed to find any sign of either. As we have indicated, there are many who suggest that Nevada rather than New Mexico may be the center of subsurface alien activity in America. This may be true in the sense that the major conflict or interaction zone between Adamic government, Nordic and Draconian Grey Reptilian forces seems to exist below the great western deserts of Southern California, Nevada and western Utah. The military installations in this region are also, according to many sources, heavily involved in the alien scenario, for either good or evil. Whereas the front lines, so to speak, may exist below the test ranges of Nevada and adjacent states, the center of reptilian activity itself seems to be Mount Archuleta, New Mexico and the Four Corners region. The American center of the various subsurface human cultures seems to be the Cascade Sierra Nevada ranges, especially between Mount Shasta and the Panamints, even though some suggest that, at least in the past, as in the case of the United States government itself, some of the human groups below the California region made the tragic mistake of opting for a policy of appeasement rather than retribution in dealing with the serpent race. This does not necessarily mean that this policy continues widespread today, although the Mount Lassen region is reportedly a strong center of current collaboration between exterran/subterranean reptilian greys and above-ground/subterranean branches of the human Illuminati. The following account, which appeared in the winter single '92 issue of Fair Out magazine, in an article by H. Leo O'Neill titled The Legend of the Death Valley Mummies, was apparently an attempt to classify the following tale as fantasy, even though the author of the article does admit that several witnesses, have reportedly been in these ancient chambers below the Mojave, mentioned in the story. These more recent events surrounding the Death Valley catacombs, mentioned in the article, are as follows. We ask the readers simply to make their own determination as to the authenticity of the account based on other similar reports which we have related earlier. In 1936, Dr. F. Bruce Russell, a retired Beverly Hills physician, struck up a conversation with a Mr. Howard E. Hill in the city of Los Angeles. Russell informed Hill that in 1931, while sinking a shaft in a claim site of his in Death Valley, he broke through to an underground cavern. After finding some lights, he entered and found himself in a cavern with two passages, one heading left and the other right. Exploring the left-hand passage, he came to a cave-in, some 25 yards from the entrance shaft. The right-hand path, however, continued at a steep angle downward for about a quarter of a mile. Although some of the passages seem natural, others appeared to have been expanded by artificial means, but all of these went off in several directions. One tunnel eventually led to a large room, and this room also had branched tunnels leading off in all directions. Laid out in this chamber were 3 mummies and several strange artifacts, some of which appeared Egyptian, while others were more American Indian-like in construction. The strange and shocking thing about the mummies, however, according to Russell, was that many of them were nearly 8 foot long or tall. He described the underground system as a kind of underground city. The inhabitants must have been very advanced, Russell concluded from what he observed, and he was certain that the find was much more important than the famous King Tut's tomb itself. Following the passages, he eventually discovered other openings to the surface, but most of these were in obscure places, yet all that he explored were within 7 miles of the shaft through which he had first entered the underground complex. Eventually, Russell discovered 32 caves in all throughout the area. Although he could not prove it, since many of them had collapsed, he supposed that many of them might have at one time connected with the underground system. These 32 caves were all within 180 square miles of each other, and were located in Death Valley and the extreme southwest region of Nevada. He also stumbled across a large chamber which he referred to as the Ritual Hall, and which contained strange markings and symbols. Another tunnel, according to Russell, went from this room to another underground hall where well-preserved bones of dinosaurs, saber-toothed tigers, mastodons and other extinct animals were displayed in hollowed areas along the walls. In 1946, after years of private investigation and secrecy, Russell decided to exploit the find. After gathering a group of potential investors, he held a meeting in which he displayed some of the artifacts which he had taken out of the underground system. Mr. Hill was invited to the meeting provided that he could help out as an investor. He accepted the invitation and attended the meeting. The company was called Amazing Explorations, and the investors' meeting took place at a suite in Beverly Hills, although all of the investors were sworn to absolute secrecy. Hill and the rest of the investors were taken, after this meeting concluded, to the underground complex itself, to where Russell returned the artifacts which he had displayed to the investors, as he was convinced that the protected atmosphere of the caves would preserve them. The group was taken into the cavern in which the bones and the temple were located. According to witnesses, it was chock full of bizarre artifacts of all kinds. Russell told them that they could look but not touch, as he realized the necessity of preserving such a find in its original condition, both for archaeological as well as monetary reasons. On August 4, 1947, Howard Hill, acting as spokesman for Amazing Explorations, issued a brief statement to the press announcing the discovery. The story received minimal coverage, to his surprise, and only appeared in a few newspapers in which the story was balanced with very derogatory and skeptical statements from the scientific community. After this, a live press conference was planned, in which Russell planned to display a skeleton and several artifacts which would convince even the most skeptical reporter. And from that they could discover for themselves the reliability of the find. For this, Russell had to return once again to the caves to retrieve the necessary artifacts. He also planned before leaving, or shortly after his return, to open a bank account at Barstow Bank to deposit investment capital. Russell left for Death Valley but was never seen again. His car was later discovered with a busted radiator in a seldom-traveled part of Death Valley. Although some suspect that he left with the money of the investors, this is unlikely since the investors' money which he possessed at the time was not nearly enough to warrant his disappearance, or the discontinuance of plans to commercialize the site as one of the wonders of the world, and the potential wealth that this might bring. The investors attempted to relocate the underground chambers that Russell had shown them, but claimed that they could not remember the exact route since they did not pay much attention to landmarks on the first trip, and besides this, the shifting sunlight and shadows and the uniformity of the vast landscape made it difficult. So ended the brief but interesting events surrounding what might have turned out to be one of the most popular wonders of the world, a potential federally protected museum and valuable to archaeologist, anthropologist and historian alike, as well as millions of potential tourists. In spite of the corroborating circumstantial evidence for the existence of these ancient ruins, this world, or perhaps its present for former inhabitants, seems to continually resist all efforts of us outsiders to probe its secrets in any dramatic way, at least, perhaps, until its protectors feel that we are ready to discover these historical treasures. Perhaps the greed that such treasures often arouse in human hearts is in itself the very force that prevents their acquisition. Perhaps when we set our hearts to search for truth, not for our own personal greed or profit, but for the benefit of all humanity, perhaps only then will the truth make itself available to those who are ready to receive it. The following letter was sent to researcher Tim Beckley, and confirms much of the information which has been surfacing in recent years. I enjoy your magazine very much. Thank you for such a fine publication. I have seen UFOs, and it seems after you have seen one you're never the same. I separated from the United States Air Force in December of 1987. In the Air Force I was a security specialist. It was my duty to safeguard top-secret aircraft, weapons and equipment. I also guarded nuclear warheads. I was stationed at David Munson AFB in Tucson, Arizona. In January of 1987 I was training in the desert for a desert survival course. This area is between Indian Springs, Nevada and Las Vegas, Nevada. It is known as Silver Flag Alpha. There is a huge mountain range, and on the other side of this range lies the Area 52 single quote, also known as Dreamland. I asked an instructor what would happen if somebody went over the ridge. He said, "No one can make it over that ridge," and then gave me a foxish grin. One night about 0300 hours I was sitting in my foxhole gazing at the stars when a white light rose over the ridge. It performed 2 vertical loops then shot up into the sky at a speed you would not believe. Also, it didn't make any noise. After separating from the Air Force, I stayed in Tucson for 19 months. During this time my best Air Force buddy received orders for Area 52. I told him to stay in touch. He called one day and told me he didn't like the assignment. I asked him about Area 52 and he said he wasn't at liberty to discuss it. He did say he was stationed at Nellis AFB Nevada and forced to live off base. He said an Air Force vehicle would pick him up and transfer him to Area 52 where he would spend 48 hours in an underground complex. After 48 hours he was then returned to his apartment for 48 hours off time. I asked him what kind of things he had seen. He only said don't be surprised if one day we are living in space. After this we talked about normal guy stuff. I never have heard from him since, which is peculiar. I wonder if the Air Force had his apartment phone tapped? Steve Blankenship, Somerset, Texas. The January, 1957 issue of Fate magazine, p. 10, carried an account of the following strange discovery. Dear Douglas, Georgia. In Coffee County, workmen of the Headwell and Pump Company were drilling a 135-foot deep hole on the property of Mr. and Mrs. Earl Meeks, 7 miles from Douglas. They stopped drilling when an unusual noise began to come out of the hole. It was a roaring sound, something like an underground railway. As soon as they heard it, the drillers stopped. Driller Scott Dinking said he never heard anything like it before, not in 27 years in the business. Joe Sports of the Associated Press went out to look at the hole. He found it was making so much noise that the Meeks had covered it partially by a plank because it kept them awake as night. Sports noticed that air was being pulled into the hole by a kind of suction. He lighted a match atop the hole. The smoke was drowned downward. Sports borrowed a mirror and reflected light so he could see the bottom. He saw water down there. It all looked quiet and peaceful. The following passages are quoted from the Greek philosopher Seneca's classic 10-volume Naturalis Questions of Nature, Volume 2, pages 99-105, 151-157. English translation by Thomas H. Corcoran, Ph.D. Harvard University Press, Cambridge, Mass. William Heinemann Limited, London. 1972. Seneca begins by postulating that rivers are no less existent under the earth merely because they are not seen. You must understand that down there rivers as large as our own glide along, some flowing gently, others resounding in their tumbling over the broken ground. What then? Will you not equally allow that there are some lakes underground and some waters stagnating there without exit? Throughout the entire earth, one of them says, runs many different kinds of water. In some places there are perpetual rivers large enough to be navigable, even without the help of rains. Moving air in the lower region inside the earth bursts the atmosphere, which is thick and complete with clouds, with the same force that clouds in our part of the world are usually broken open. Now permit me to tell you a story. Asclepiodotus is my authority that many men were sent down by Philip, that is Philip II of Macedon, 382-336 before Christ, the father of Alexander the Great, who according to Diodorus opened several new mines, into an old mine, long since abandoned, to find out what riches it might have, what its condition was, whether ancient avarice had left anything for future generations. They descended with a large supply of torches, enough to last many days. After a while, when they were exhausted by the long journey, they, after breaking into vast cavities, saw a sight that made them shudder, huge rivers and vast reservoirs of motionless water, equal to ours above ground and yet not pressed down by the earth stretching above, but with a vast free space overhead. I read this story with great enjoyment, for I realize that our age suffers not from new vices but from vices that have been handed down all the way from antiquity, and it is not our age that avarice first pried into the veins of earth and rock searching for treasure poorly hidden in the darkness. Even before King Philip of Macedon there were men who followed after money down into the deepest hiding places and, of upright and free-born spirit as they were, let themselves down into those caverns where no difference between night and day reaches. What powerful necessity bent men down, man ordinarily erect to the stars, and buried him to the bottom of the innermost earth so that he might dig out gold, no less dangerous to search for than it is to possess? On account of this he dug shafts and crawled around the mud-smeared, uncertain booty, forgetful of day, forgetful of the better nature of things from which he had turned himself away. They dared to descend to a place where they found a strange order of things, layers of earth hanging overhead, dead winds in the darkness, dreadful springs of water flowing for no man, and a night other than our own, and perpetual. Then, after doing these things, they fear the underworld. The following appears on p. 169 of Daniel Cohen's book The Ancient Visitors, Doubleday and Company, New York 1976. For centuries hell was a very real and tangible place found somewhere underground. The entrance to hell has been located countless times. Usually it was found in the country of one's enemy. There were serious and scholarly speculations about huge underground caves. One 17th century scholar said that dragons lived in underground caves, and that is why we saw so few of them. Siberian tribesmen who found the frozen remains of woolly mammoths assumed that they were the remains of creatures that lived in a subterranean world. The Siberians could not conceive of extinct animals that had lived thousands of years ago, but vast underground worlds came quite naturally to them. According to legend, dwarfs lived in underground caves, and most accounts placed the realm of fairies under the earth as well. In reference to the caverns of hell or Hades, this belief predates Christianity itself and can be traced back to ancient Greece. The Greeks spoke of Hades as a vast series of deep caverns, some containing frozen conditions while others filled with smoking flames. The real tormentors of Hades, however, were the fallen angels of ancient tradition, who are said to torment all souls that enter here. Also traditionally, over the entrance to Hades can be read the words, "Abandon all hope, O-E-W-H-O, enter here." Hades is said to be the center of the satanic kingdom established by the fallen archangel Lucifer after his failed coup d'etat against the throne of the Creator. It is said to contain vast fortresses created by his infernal followers over the eons, possibly created of insubstantial or etheric matter. As one descends through the caverns of Hades, according to Greek tradition, things only become worse, until at last one reaches the realm of Tartarus itself. Tartarus, according to the Greeks, is as far below Hades as Hades is beneath the earth. It is a great chasm in the extreme depths that is diffused throughout the entire earth. The Christian Bible refers to Tartarus as the bottomless pit. Bottomless might indicate an absence of gravity and a sense of eternal falling for those unfortunate enough to enter therein. Apparently physical life could not possibly exist there because of the suffocating heat and darkness, and the lack of oxygen, which must instantly be consumed by the volcanic flames of terrifying realm. The Bible also adds that there is a third level to hell, called Gehenna, or a lake of boiling magma or fire. A place almost too horrifying to imagine. This certainly does not conflict with present geological theory concerning the interior of the earth, which is said to increase in temperature as one passes the crust, the moho, the upper and lower mantle, and finally the outer and inner molten core. However, there is another theory as to the configuration of the center of the earth, one which is steadily growing in popularity. This theory states that the earth is more like a gigantic jout with a hollow interior. In this case the hollow would not coincide with the bottomless pit simply because the inner surface pushes outward as opposed to the inward gravitational push of the outer surface. However, if one were standing on the inner surface they would not drift off to the center of the planet because they are attached or drawn to the inner surface, not gravitationally but through centrifugal force, the same force that one can see at work in a washing machine as the spin cycle pushes everything against the inner surface, leaving a hollow center. Several people in the past have proposed this theory, among them Edmund Halley, after whom Halley's Comet is named. Captain John Cleve Sims, whose writings actually inspired a government expedition to the North Pole, as the theory states that the entrances to the inner hollow exist somewhere near the North and South Poles. And Cotton Mather's, who was a central figure in the Salem witch trials. Also, countless science and fantasy fiction writers have used this theme in their writings, some of the more well-known authors being Edgar Rice Burroughs and Edgar Allan Poe. If such a concavity exists, then how would the traditions of Hades, Tartarus and Gehenna fit into this new cosmography of a geodetic planet? One possibility is given by Dr. Hank Cressman, who claims that he was shown an underground city below the Grand Canyon area by a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Hopi Indian. This city was connected to its counterpart on the inner surface of the Earth's alleged concavity, a city of Grecian-like architecture called Palat Quapi. In 1994, researcher B. Alan Walton sent Cressman a letter in which he posed the following questions. Have your Hopi sources mentioned anything about the nature of the Earth between the outer and inner hollow crust? I am particularly interested in learning of conditions within the terminal zone where gravitational pull and centrifugal push cancel each other out. My theory is that there would be no gravity, and thus vast cavernous spaces. I would guess that this would also include a chaotic environment similar to the Greek tradition of Tartarus, or the bottomless, non-gravitational pit where earth material, magma, various chemicals and gases are being slammed together in weightlessness by the rotational movement of the earth itself, causing an inferno-like region where physical life could not exist, as it apparently does on the inner and outer crusts of this giant jout known as Earth. Hank Cressman's response, dated November 27, 1994, was as follows. The nature of the Earth between the outer and inner Earth is molten lava-type rock. When I walked on the inside of the Earth, it was the same gravity pull, no difference. However, the air machines powered by the eternal sun, the sky is blue without any clouds 24 hours a day. Note, the logistics of an internal sun at the center point, as suggested by several earlier theorists, would seem to violate the laws of physics when compared to the mass necessary for a sun or star to gain nuclear fusion ability, or whatever process is at work. Perhaps the sun that is described is actually a focal point of the electromagnetic currents passing through the Earth, similar to the pinpoint of light that can sometimes be seen in the center of a spherical crystal. Branton. The Inferno region does exist in cavities between the two worlds. If you saw the movie Stargate, it is similar going through the gate to the inner world. Elsewhere, Cressman stated that when he was transported to the interior surface from the underground city below Arizona, it was at the speed of light, suggesting that instantaneous travel was and is accomplished between the two worlds via time-space windows, or teleportation rather than via tunnels that pass through the infernal zones. Depending on the source, the distance between the outer and inner surfaces may be anywhere from 500 to 1,500 miles. In the Book of Revelation, as well as other sections of Judeo-Christian scripture, there is a prophetic event described which some refer to as the rapture. The word doesn't exist in the Bible, although the concept does. This event is said to coincide with the disappearance of deceased Christian believers from their graves. Since certain non-human alien species have been known to counterfeit divine or biblical events through the application of high occult technology, is it possible that this prophetical event of the rapture may also be counterfeited for some psychological or manipulative purpose? The following incident was reported in the October 1964 issue of Search magazine, by Will Carson in his column Poignant to the Unknown, A Grave Matter. Jo was born in Spain, to which country her late parents originally had immigrated from what was then called Bohemia. Their native village has long since been submerged by the waters of a hydroelectric project, all of which pretty well obliterates our chances of pinpointing the exact time and date. But as she recalls her parents relating many times, one day all the graves in the cemetery behind the now vanished village were found to be empty, but there were no mounds of dirt beside each grave. Upon further investigation, the excavations proved to be apparently bottomless. Authorities were never able to solve the mystery, and finally, since it was impossible to refill the graves, they were boarded over and sealed with mortar and a high stone fence built around the area. The following is from an ad describing a book written by Michael X. No relation to Commander X. Titled We Want You, Hitler Alive, published by UFO Review. Box 753. New Brunswick, New Jersey 08903. Did Hitler capture alien crew and build his own flying saucer? Here is proof Hitler escaped death, and tried to reorganize his mighty forces at the South Pole in underground bases. Here also are clear close-up photos of Hitler's own secret flying discs, which he hoped would someday enable him to rule the world. Discussed for the first time is the mysterious Mr. Mahalik, who had toured Europe telling of his contacts with aliens and the establishment of the majestic government of the World Republic of Earth, and how both Moscow and Washington would be wiped out if they did not give in to otherworldly advice. Was he speaking on behalf of the Führer? In reference to any possible international counter-offensive against the Greys, some have suggested that the threat will be used by the Illuminati as an excuse to unite the world together in a one-world government. If in fact the Korean and Vietnam Wars were orchestrated by the serpent cults as some have suggested, is it not likely that the United Nations-backed counter-offensive against the Greys will result in the same type of no-win war with an eventual loss on our side? Especially if the one-worlders are collaborating with the Greys and Reptilians? Perhaps it would be best for each individual nation to deal with the reptilian infestation or undermining of their own countries in their own way, without the help of a world militia, or keep the battle at a grassroots level. Global cooperation on an economic level might be tolerated by freedom-loving peoples, but global control on a political level definitely will not be. A world federation may be maintained without surrendering all national sovereignties to a one-world political force, namely, the New World Order. Those extraterrestrials who profess the need for a one-world government on Earth as a prerequisite to join their alliances or federations should realize that the cultural diversity on Earth is unique in the universe, and therefore a unique answer to the problem should be suggested, namely that they attempt to align themselves with the governments of individual sovereign nations, and offer them memberships within their confederations, rather than wait for the world to turn into a global police state. The one-world republic that they so desperately seek could just as easily become a one-world dictatorship that would be controlled by despots, allied to the Greys for instance, who might bear animosity to the Federation. On the other hand, if an individual nation were to become a member of such a federation, they could enjoy the benefits of such cooperation. Such a plan must include the promise of the Federation to come to the aid of that nation in a defensive manner if it is being threatened by another nation, especially one backed by an opposing interstellar group. But such an agreement must absolutely prohibit any type of offensive attack on the part of the host nation across its borders and a strict compliance with an international non-interference policy. It goes without saying that, for instance, such a nation would have the right to root out any subsurface base utilized by parasitical groups such as the Greys that are being used as centers of abduction, mutilation, implantation and other such activities against the inhabitants of that nation. The Federation is fully justified in admitting individual nations into its fold, and this should not be misconstrued as a violation of their prime directive, especially since the reptilian Greys have already established their own destructive alliances with various national governments throughout the world. In light of this, such a plan is the only way that the federations, alliances, etc., can salvage their own interests for the future of planet Earth. Now to continue with the subject of how individual nations are responding to the reality of alien contact, the Octave issue of Nexus magazine related the following information in an article titled Radio Program on UFO Cover-Up. The following is an example of what one can pick up off the computer networks. The network in this case is called EarthNet, run by Pegasus Networks based in Byron Bay, P.O. Box 201. Byron Bay NSW 2481. *** Topic: Aliens from Outer Space. *** written 12:14 a.m., August 5, 1991 by Hu and Peg. SCI.astro***. I recently heard a Radio 1 program in the UK that contained an interview with a leading proponent of the popular US government as aliens locked up and is experimenting with their spaceplanes conspiracy theory. However, this particular individual sounded very reasonable, did not make any outrageous claims, and further had some interesting facts to disclose. In particular, he mentioned several verifiable facts which I would like some follow-up on. Rockwell International and NASA were planning a massive joint exhibition of space exploration this year, 1991, but it was delayed inexplicably until 1992. In the official prospectus for this exhibition, one of the exhibits was clearly stated to be an extraterrestrial spacecraft. When asked about this by various individuals, all inquiries were referred by NASA to the United States. An unnamed Pentagon spokesman speaking off the record is meant to have indicated that they had a number of such space vehicles to choose from. The Pentagon also held a press conference to deal with press inquiries on this matter, and refused to answer any questions. In fact, reporters later said that the Pentagon had asked most of the questions, and they all pertained to what would be the public reaction if. The guy on the radio program referred extensively to two NASA consultant engineers who claimed to have worked on alien spacecraft studying propulsion systems for NASA. Both had high-level security clearances in the States. Tim Beckley's UFO Review, issue number 37, carried the following article by the editor titled Saucers vs. Earth Mad UFOs. We quote excerpts here beginning with a reference to researcher William Cooper. William Cooper will, he says, prove once and for all that the secret societies, not our constitutional government, murdered President Kennedy as a sacrifice to the ancient god Baal in an outdoor temple. Cooper will also, in future lectures, explain the true meaning of the movie 2001 as a message of the secret societies to their followers, and will show a first-generation color copy of the Zapruder film with all the previously missing frames. The Anti-Gravity World of Vladimir Terziski. According to Terziski, the Nazis were building flying saucers that took them to other planets even before the start of World War II. Being a Slav, Vladimir says he cannot but have the utmost revulsion towards everything Hitler's racial and political philosophies stood for. and it is because of his revulsion he decided to look into various black technologies developed by the Nazis, whom he now believes were secretly backed by the sinister Illuminati operating way behind the scenes. Note, as can be seen elsewhere in this file, the link between the Illuminati and the Nazis seems to have been the Gnostic Jesuit and Thule societies, Branton. In his vast collection of photos and other documents, Terziski has many pictures and drawings of the various disc-shaped craft constructed by the Nazi scientists that were powered by Schauberger turbines and Kohler-Tech ion magnetogravitic drives, all based upon free energy or anti-gravity principles. Actually, Vladimir says that we've known all about anti-gravity for a long time and that the British Marconi Group may actually have landed on the moon a century ago, and even the Vatican has a group of scientists WHO rocket off into space from South American bases from time to time. Meanwhile, deep underground at Area 51's Dream Lab in the Nevada desert, a renegade branch of the CIA, protected by a private security SS-like police force that the Illuminati supplies, is constructing their own fleet of flying saucers utilizing Hitler's forbidden technology. Elsewhere in this file we have written of the alleged Federation, which loosely ties together such human colonies as those in Tau Ceti, Epsilon Eridani, the Taygeta and other systems of the Pleiades, Vega and Lyra, various colonies in the Hyades, the alleged Solarian Tribunal on the moons of Saturn, Alpha Centauri, various cultures from the Andromeda constellation, the Koldajan and other systems from the Dower antimatter universe, and the Omits in Wolf 424, all of which have been repeatedly described by numerous and apparently separate contactees. One additional allegation is that the Omits, a Scandinavian-appearing race who live on a planet with a magnetic field much more intense than that of Earth, have apparently made contact with scientists associated with the French and Spanish governments. It is interesting that M.K. Jessup's annotated version of the case for the UFO contains comments by alleged members of an ancient Terran race who have access to interplanetary craft technology. These have stated that France, for instance, has been the subject of much interest among certain ex-Terran cultures because of its unique social atmosphere. The Omits allegedly come from the star system we know of as Wolf 424, a star which they themselves refer to as Ioma. Their insignia resembles an H with an extra vertical bar in the middle and the four corners of the H tapered into an outward curve. This symbol has been photographed on the underside of some UFOs which have been encountered in the 20th century. Also the Omits speak of themselves as belonging to a large federation of planets, possibly consisting more or less of the interstellar regions described above. They seem to have a particularly strong alliance with the Oriental-like Vegans, who are a remnant of the ancient Lyran civilization that gave rise to the present human cultures in the Pleiades. The following are several abbreviated excerpts taken from the Omega Project, by Kenneth Ring, Ph.D. William Morrow and Company, New York 1972. The following points were brought out in the book, most abductions, possibly between 60%-80%. Branton, are conducted by the Greys of traditional description. Many state that their experiences are often dreamlike, yet with evidence suggesting real events. The Greys, and in some cases black creatures in capes that act as guards during the painful and terrifying medical operations, have a way of blurring their faces in the minds of the abductees, so that the abductee cannot later recall what the alien's face looked like. Many abductees experience sleeping problems, not to mention severe social relational sexual problems after being abducted by the Saurian or Reptilian Greys, and these problems often last for years afterwards. Some abductees who resist are shocked repeatedly with an electric gadget which may induce paralysis and or unconsciousness. A majority of the Greys seem to be of the gray-white variety, some with opaque, black eyes and some with vertically slit, snake or lizard-like pupils. Some of the Greys are described as sinister, and one abductee stated that when she was taken, one alien was by my head and attempted to frighten me with his large eyes, as three other creatures mechanically performed painful operations, unheeding of her terrified cries to make them stop. She, Claire Chambers, stated that in my many encounters where I have always been kidnapped from my home, the aliens have shown no compassion. I have several times felt them exhibit fear when I have hit them, as they do feel fear. Their reaction behavior patterns do not indicate an intelligence as high as I would expect from their technology due to their collective consciousness nature. Branton. These experiences have been dreadful, terrifying, and I would like them to stop. Note: 4 separate doctors have confirmed various wounds and injuries in Claire Chambers, which she insists resulted from the abductions. Some grayish aliens, with 3-digit fingers, have been described as being 7 feet tall. Reptons? Branton. One woman who was abducted by them felt as if the creatures wanted her to have the impression that they were friendly. But after being returned to her car from which she was abducted, I then broke to pieces as my whole body shook uncontrollably. I cried, "Oh God, why me?" I couldn't calm myself as I cried like a baby. A woman with an M.W. degree, who was at the time of this revelation 51 years old, stated, "The first experience was when I was a child of about 5. For years I had a recurring dream of standing beside a field when a hole opens up in the ground in front of me. The dream ends with me looking into the hole. I was just standing there looking at the hole. Under hypnosis I recall that I stepped into the hole and walked down a short tunnel. The tunnel widened into a small waiting area where there was a bench just at the right height for a 5-year-old. I sat down and waited. A tall black, featureless being came through a doorway, walked to me and held out his hand. I took his hand and went back through the doorway with him. He placed me on a table that appeared to be about 3 to 4 feet high. He laid me on my back and took one big hand and held my upper body flat on the table. The other beings were behind him looking at instruments on the wall. I was held this way for several minutes. When the being turned to look at the other two, it was as if he lost control over me and I jerked out from under his hand, fell off the end of the table and ran for the door. When I got to the door, I knew I wasn't supposed to go any further. I stopped and turned around. The being who had been holding me came to me, took hold of my left arm and looked into my eyes. I was looking at where the eyes should be on a human, but I don't remember actually seeing eyes. I feel something was communicated, but I don't know what. The author states that some of the large opaque black eyes seen by many abductees, after being taken by the Greys, seem to have been coverings for real eyes which they felt might have been hidden behind or inside of what might have been artificial opaque black visual coverings. At least this was the impression that some abductees had. The following article, The Incredible Revelations of Dr. Kuppers, by Helga Morrow, also appeared in UFO Review, issue number 37, with the following heading: "He escaped from Nazi Germany at the height of World War II and came to America to work for the United States military on top-secret projects involving invisibility, time manipulation, anti-gravity research and teleportation." Editor's note: the following is a highly abbreviated account of Helga Morrow's recollections of her late father, Dr. Fred A. Kuppers, a German-born engineer who defected to the United States during World War II. Helga's story: I have learned from various sources that my father was one of the scientists who worked on the Philadelphia experiment, had invented the timing device for the bomb, had been chosen by the bomb scientists to represent them to Harry Truman, asking him not to drop the bomb, had invented the mathematical formula that brought the astronauts back, had designed the miniaturized electrical system of Sputnik, the first space launching, had worked on Project Blue Book/Black Book, UFOs, had initiated the use of aluminum wiring to replace the heavier wiring in World War II planes, had worked with mind warfare, using psychics to communicate with astronauts in case communication systems failed, and had trained extraterrestrials to fit into human society. My head spun. In it wheels were turning, and 1,000 things began to make sense. Suddenly the things my father had told me in my childhood and youth snapped into place. It was as if 19 years after I attended my father's funeral, I began to know him for the first time as only a few others knew him, a man who, for obvious reasons, could never be mentioned in public records, but who had clearly deserved such recognition for the valuable service he had given the nation. My mind began to go back to my earliest remembrances. When I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, I watched him hang up an award from RCA in his room. I asked, "Why did you get this award?" He told me it was too lengthy to go into. I said, "Tree me." And he did. He said it was an award for an experiment in time, and then proceeded to put 2 ashtrays on his bed, and through simple gestures and explanations, show how 2 objects could transpose in time and return the same way. Then he took me into the cellar, where he put some steel shavings in a cigar box with a large U-shaped magnet taped underneath. He gently tapped the steel shavings, and to my amazement, 2 distinct series of concentric circles gradually appeared. He then simplified this by saying that if one could transpose these circles, One could transpose time or bend time such as to speed it up or slow it down, or even stop it altogether. Branton. He said that alien spacecraft were partly moved by reverse magnetism. He showed me how to get this effect by holding two opposite magnets. I never forgot this lesson. And this was before anyone really talked about flying saucers. I was Daddy's confidant. I never discussed this information with anyone. He had sworn me to secrecy. My father was not home much, only several times a year. He was completely focused on his work, so normal family life was difficult for him. Daddy was a popular innovator in many fields of science and technology. All his patents became the property of either the company that employed him or the United States government. Such patents, which have been established by various scientists working in anti-gravity research, allegedly exist in the patent offices for all to see, if they only knew how and where to find them. Branton. The third winter of 1961 before he died, February 12, 1962, Lincoln's birthday, my father confided many things to me. He told me that what he was about to tell me was bizarre, unbelievable and might sound absolutely crazy. I was 27 at the time, and thought he had gone off the deep end. My mother had always thought so. Daddy assured me that by the time I reached 55 or so, all these bizarre statements that he was about to make, as well as everything he had ever explained to me when I was a child, would come back to me and make sense. Single quote. He told me that he had 3 months to live. They had given him 3 months to conclude his personal affairs, he said. I asked, who are they? He said I wouldn't understand. So I realized that I was taking my last walk with him through Guilford. He turned around to see if he was being followed, as always, aware of intrusion. He confided that he had not only been on the moon but inside it, and that he had both spoken to and trained extraterrestrials who looked like us to blend into human society. He had been in spaceships and had traveled in space. Single quote. He told me of the riots where we would kill or be killed in a period of racial intolerance that would occur around 1966, which is now history. He told me that red-baiting propaganda was a lie to keep humanity occupied with worry over fighting communism, and that in reality the two nations were great friends. Russian scientists got along well with their American counterparts and worked amiably together. The Russian threat was nothing but bees, and a distraction for the public. In the meantime, there were alien bases all over the world and on the moon. He said that whoever controls the moon can target any place on Earth. No place would be safe. Therefore, Russians and Americans must remain friends or eliminate each other. He told me he had worked with Tesla, Einstein, von Braun, von Neumann and many others. My father broke down and cried when I visited him that Christmas. He said, if you only knew the real truth. But as long as I didn't I was safe, he said. He seemed a frightened man alone with his thoughts, afraid to speak out, trusting no one. He rarely spoke on the phone. Our phone had always been tapped and always thought he was being followed. My father died in the hospital in the arms of a nun, we were told. When my mother wanted to send flowers and candy to this unknown nun, she was told that there had been no nun in his room, though we had seen her at the time of his fatal heart attack. She couldn't be traced. At his funeral, I saw 2 Secret Service men at his coffin wearing the obvious trench coats. There was something strange about the body in the coffin. I always remember my father's hairy arms and hands. But there was no hair on those hands. His face felt like cold stone, and it had so much makeup that it looked like wax. Was it really my father in the coffin? If so, why had his grave disappeared when I looked for it in the family plot in 1985, a plot that dated back hundreds of years? There was no trace that it had ever existed. There were no grave records. And then on May 30, 1962, several months later, he materialized before me and told me he was not dead, but only in another dimension and time. I felt his suit, smelled his mall shaving cream, and his weight pushed down the mattress on my bed. He was wearing his usual conservative gray suit. I even felt the material as I touched his knee. He told me to continue his work, but not call on him unless absolutely necessary, as appearing to me was painful. He said that he would make himself known to me at the crossroads of my life to help me, and he has kept his promise. Based on other accounts, another dimension in time would probably indicate that the dimension into which he had been phased was as a dimensional branch off from the mainstream multidimensional reality that is visible to us. Since time, space and matter are all integral parts of the unified field, it has been theorized that another dimension in time, For instance, a dimension in which the time flow is accelerated, one of their days may equal one of our hours, for instance, would also include a spatial and molecular shift as well. This could be perceived either as entering another dimension or simply as a phasing of an individual to the point that he or she begins to perceive and become part of a dimension that was always there, yet one which they could not comprehend or interact with until they were tuned into it on the molecular level. This dimension would be invisible to most of those within the mainstream of reality, and we would be invisible to them to some extent, possibly an extent which is determined by the depth of the molecular time-space phasing. Returning to the subject of alien activity, in particular the Greys, there are those who believe that such activity has some apocalyptic and theological significance. Could such activity have been prophesied in ancient spiritual texts? Leviticus 26:22 in the Torah or Old Testament relates a strange warning, possibly directed against those nations who tend to ignore the command of the Almighty or the Creator to live together in brotherly love. Could this be a prophecy of a coming invasion of alien beasts such as the Greys? The Torah describes the serpent race as beasts in Genesis chapter 3, although it also makes it clear that these reptilians were by far the most superior, subtle, and intelligent members of the entire animal kingdoms. We quote this passage as follows. See also, Amos 9:2-3, I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. George Adamski, the 1950s contactee and alleged Rosicrucian, was one of several who claimed to have had contacted Aryan-like saucer pilots during that time period. One little-known fact about his contact in the Mojave Desert was that one of the footprints left by the man he encountered in his initial experience revealed some strange symbols which had apparently been impressed into the ground from the sole of the alien's shoe. One footprint showed two depictions of a swastika. One interpretation is that the saucer pilots encountered by George Adamski and other contactees such as George King, George Van Tassel, George Hunt Williamson. Apparently these E.T.S. have an affinity for those bearing the name George. Branton, Howard Menger, Mel Noel, and others are not Germans in the true sense of the word. It is believed by some, however, that the Germans have for centuries been doing business with a race of ancient Aryans, possibly tied in with the ancient Aryans who occupied India several thousand years ago, or Aryani, who were part of a high-tech society based in underground cities near the North and South Poles. German occultists in fact have been known to sabotage polar expeditions of other nations long before the beginning of World War I. These Aryans may have assisted the Germans with their technology during World War II, although it is uncertain whether or not they actually agreed with or supported Adolf Hitler's racist genocidal policies. These Aryani seem to have some connection with the so-called Tribunal on Saturn, which may explain why plans discovered for Nazi flying discs revealed one design that was an exact duplicate of the so-called Venusian design described and photographed by Adamski. In his book Messengers of Deception, Bantam Books, 1980, Jack Valley relates some disturbing connections between fascist politics and some of the early contactees of California. According to Valley, Adamski had pre-war ties with American fascist leader William Dudley Pelley, who was interned during the war. Contactee George Hunt Williamson, whose real name was Michael W. Novick, was associated with Pelley's organization, Soulcraft, in the early 50s. Other associates of Williamson during the great era of the flying saucers were such contactees as John McCoy and the two Stanford brothers, Ray and Rex. Pelley, who died in 1965, was the leader of the Silver Shirts, an American Nazi group which began its activities about 1932. Its membership overlapped strongly with Guy Ballard's I Am movement based at Mount Shasta. It was about 1950 that G.H. Williamson began working for Pelley at the offices of his Soulcraft Publications, in Noblesville, Indiana, before moving to California, where he allegedly witnessed Adamski's desert contact in 1952, with a Venusian with long blonde hair. Former Dulce worker Thomas Costello, who was previously alleged to have worked as a top-secret photo analyst for the Air Force, reported seeing a photo of a disc with a swastika on its side. In all fairness, as we have suggested, it is possible that those who contacted Adamski were not Nazis as we know them. Perhaps Adolf Hitler took an ancient and already existing symbol as some suggest and corrupted it with his own malevolent occultic philosophies. Then again, many of the claims made to Adamski do not ring true with many scientific ufologists, such as the allegation that the surface of Venus is just as temperate and mild as the Earth itself, and so on. Could those who contacted Adamski have been using Venus as a cover to hide their true place of origin, perhaps Antarctica, as other researchers have suggested? As for the swastika itself, the Hopi Indians of northwest Arizona and the ancient Hindus, for instance, were apparently using it thousands of years before the Nazis began to. And some suggest that German occultists may have borrowed the symbol from them. The following report appeared in the September 1966 issue of Fate, pages 25 and 28. From Down Under, we suspect this story may be a hoax, but we can't resist reporting it. We have 2 different clippings from Darwin, Australia, concerning the discovery of animal flesh, hairs and hide during a well drilling operation at a depth of 102 feet. An experienced well driller, Norman Jensen, was boring for water 15 miles from Killarney Homestead, about 350 miles south of Darwin. He had penetrated 7 layers of limestone, clay, red soil and sandstone when, at 102 feet, the bit of the drill struck something soft and quickly dropped to 111 feet. Jensen thought the drill had penetrated an underground water course and lowered a pump to make tests. His pump brought to the surface a bucket full of what he believed to be flesh, bone, hide and hairs. Jensen told Constable Roy Harvey he never had seen anything like this before. Some of the material was given to chickens at Killarney Station. They ate it, apparently without ill effect. Several days later the rest of the matter had not putrefied, although it had been left exposed in the open air. Dr. W. A. Langsford, Northern Territory Director of Health in Darwin, stated that microscopic examination revealed the material to be hair and tissue. Samples were to be forwarded to forensic laboratories in Adelaide for further tests. There is even a possibility, he said, that the matter is human. Possibly romancing. Australians report that for many years overland drovers have disliked taking cattle along that part of the route because of frequent stampedes. One might wonder if the material allegedly recovered from the well might have been from a Sasquatch-like creature or an animal unknown to us. It would seem logical for living matter, once dead, to remain relatively free from putrefaction for long periods of time within the cool and unchanging environment of an underground cavern system as opposed to the often hot, degenerating and debilitating environment on the surface. Could a type of natural mummification have also taken place underground, possibly explaining why the hair and flesh had not putrefied after several days? According to William Hamilton, John Lear revealed an incident concerning an older gentleman who was known only as Mr. K, whose son was being held captive in an underground base in Utah. This son formerly worked in the Dulce Base in New Mexico and possibly was transferred to the base in Utah via an underground route. When contacted about the incident, Mr. Lear had this to say: "The son, whose father I met and who passed away several years ago, is apparently being held in a base near or around Sleeping Ute Mountain, Utah. I don't remember how I came by that information, but it had to do with some research I was conducting in a search for the Project Blue Light base near Dolores, which I never found." Native Indians of Alaska refer to a benevolent tribe who long ago disappeared underground into vast underground chambers below the mountains north of the town of Tanana. Occasionally, tradition holds, a young member of one of the villages on the surface would become overly discouraged by their life in the world above, and would make a journey in search of these caverns and their peaceful inhabitants, and disappear into the underground land where they would enjoy a more fulfilling life. It would be very encouraging if most of the accounts of subsurface colonies were of this genre. A few centuries ago this might have been the case, but the infestation and undermining of the continents by so-called draconian forces and the mercenary gray species that work for them has reportedly increased dramatically, especially during the last few centuries, to the point that their influence may be dominant in the subterranean world. However, it is encouraging that in the latter part of the 20th century the reptilian advances seem to have halted in several areas of the world as indicated by the numerous standoffs, and in some cases reptilian forces have apparently been driven back and defeated as more and more humans refuse to give up their ground, having become aware of their malicious intent as well as the propaganda and deceptions which the aliens have in the past used as effective tools of conquest on their part. Some researchers have stated that there are some governments which are considering possible overt military action against the serpent races, or Greys. Ebs single quote, Alfs single quote etc., as they are also known, if such becomes necessary. Covert military action has allegedly been initiated in the past, with mixed results. The alleged interception of a reptilian-controlled aerial craft in South Africa could be considered a victory, whereas the 66 CIA-trained Delta Force and Blue Beret Special Forces, casualties in the Dulce Wars, and God only knows how many casualties in the way of the human abductions and mutilations, the knowledge of which allegedly attributed in part to the wars beneath the Arcoleta Mesa in New Mexico, could be considered a defeat. If or when such action is taken, it would be very wise to consider the need for what we may call an occupational force. To illustrate, let's use the Middle East crisis of the early 1990s as an example, without going into whether the economic motives for the counter-offensive were commendable or not. In that case, we had a small, relatively undefended country by the name of Kuwait. Having become apathetic to the Iraqi-Babylonian threat, this small nation in essence let their guard down, fell asleep under the influence of their wealthy, materialistic and extravagant lifestyle, and in such a drunken state lost their vigilance against any possible enemy who might try to overtake them. Taking advantage of the relatively undefended borders, Iraqi troops swiftly moved in and took control of the nation, looting and pillaging, and in some cases gang-raping women and little girls in front of their families, following which the entire family was often murdered. Unable to defend themselves, they petitioned a much more powerful force, the United States and the Allied coalition, to help them fight the battle. The rest is history. After the Allies drove modern Babylon from Kuwait, Saddam Hussein made no secret of the fact that he identified himself with the first Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, and was in the process of rebuilding the ancient city of Babylon. An occupational force was left by some of the Allies, as well as the now much more vigilant Kuwaitis. After this enemy, not necessarily the Iraqi soldiers themselves, but the mad dictator who drove them to their deaths by the thousands, and whom many of them secretly resented, was cast out, this occupational force was necessary to defend the region from a possible reinvasion. If such an occupational defense force once again became non-vigilant and let down its guard, then there is a chance that the former invaders would regroup their forces and reinvade the land, possibly with even greater fury, not willing to make the same mistake as before. In the same manner, if an overt attack against the reptilian invaders is undertaken, it would serve little purpose in the long run to destroy multitudes of them physically and ignore the need for their human victims of subtle alien occult technological mind manipulation, to be delivered from their post-traumatic stress and other psychological, emotional and physical problems that were the direct result of alien interference in their lives. The need for psychological and spiritual "deprogramming", as well as the safe removal of implants and subconscious programs injected through hypnotic indoctrination, would be paramount. Since the serpent races rely on demoniacal energy and assistance to empower their activities, they seek to destroy man's connection or relationship with Almighty God, the only one powerful enough to protect and defend man from this reptilian influence, a force which would otherwise seek to conquer and control all of creation using all of the deception, confusion, subtlety and cunning at its disposal. There is no middle ground. One cannot expect to defeat these dragons of deception, not the poltergeists or infernal supernatural entities that motivate them, while at the same time refusing to abide in the life or light of God. If we were to destroy most of the reptilian influences and temporarily cast them out of their trenches, so to speak, and at the same time refuse to establish an occupying force in the form of divine dominion in our own personal lives as a nation, then the reptilians may regather their infernal forces and return in even greater force the next time, intent on learning from the mistakes of their last defeat. Several abductees have allegedly been taken during the night by government officials by way of anything from flying discs, pickups, or even jet aircraft. One couple, referred to in a book titled Into the Fringe by Carla Turner, Ph.D. Opening parenthesis Berkeley Books, New York 1992, described such an abduction which they shared one night. They were drugged and put into a type of dreamlike trance and then taken via pickup to a remote swamp-like area. The next thing they remembered was descending through some type of tube only to find themselves walking through a musty underground cavern filled with various machines similar to those one might find in a factory. They were escorted into a room which resembled a saloon. The husband later felt as if this atmosphere may have been specifically designed to reinforce the dreamy quality of the experience. However, the husband began to come out of the trance, at which point a man, like an army sergeant, noticed him and became very upset and emotional. He began asking the husband questions about his abductions by the Greys. The couple did recall such abductions, which were shared with other people, some of whom they claimed were in the underground military installation that same night. The military officer wanted to know what the Greys had told them, what their plans were, and so on. When the husband refused to answer him, the officer lost control and became very emotional, demanding to be told what the Greys were doing, treating him more or less like a collaborator with an enemy power rather than as a victim of an abduction. If the constitutional government is going to such lengths to find out what is going on, then they must not have all of the answers. Unfortunately, many abductees are seen as possible collaborators by various segments of the United States military, and the fault for this probably lies with them as well as with the abductees, being that the constitutionals through their own apathy had in the past allowed the secret government, particularly the CIA, to drag them into the game. The Air Force, for instance, must have been deceived by the CIA as to the true nature of the Greys, and it has only been in recent decades that they have come to realize the full truth, and therefore explaining the present intelligence war between the two intelligence agencies, Naval Intelligence's COM-12, which supports a counter-offensive against the Grey Empire, and the pro-Grey CIA NSA Aquarius agency, both of which are fighting for control of the Nevada military complex, the underground bases, the Walkenhut technologies, the intelligence network, especially MJ-12, and the United States government itself. Hopefully in the future the elected government and the abduction victims will be able to put aside their paranoia of each other, no doubt fueled by alien propaganda, and work together for each other's mutual benefit as they did during the genesis of the American Republic. At this point it is obvious that if they don't learn to work together and respect each other, the government respecting the public's right to constitutional freedom, and the public respecting the constitutional government's duly elected authority, little will be accomplished in the way of defending ourselves from the alien vermin who infest and undermine the nations of our world. First, we must make a distinction between the constitutionally elected open government and the National Socialist imposed secret government. To put it simply, the United Nations, who betrayed America during the Korean and Vietnam Wars, is the enemy within that must be thrown out of America. If they desire a world dictatorship, for that is exactly what they are promoting, in spite of the benevolent world government tripe that they have been spouting for years, then they can go do it somewhere else. As for the United States of America, we have our own historical document upon which this great nation was founded, the Declaration of Independence. The following account was revealed by writer and UFO investigator Preston Dennett, in an article titled, Exposed, Project Redlight. In his article, which originally reached several thousand readers, he reveals the following information which supports the allegations of William Cooper, John Lear, Michael Lindemann and several others. Tom's story began in high school. He was very bright and had received an exceptionally high score on the Scholastic Aptitude Test. In fact, his scores were so high, it caused some attention to be paid to him. It seemed that the United States government was very interested in Tom and wanted him to work for them. He had no idea then what his high scores were going to cost him. Government officials first approached Tom's parents, and asked them if they would allow their son to work for the government. When Tom's parents gave their consent, Tom was approached and given an offer he couldn't refuse. In exchange for his services, he would receive a top-secret security clearance to match a ridiculously large salary. His job was to conduct research in a top-secret underground base in Alaska. Tom accepted the offer and went directly out of high school and into government service. He told everyone that he was stationed at a base in Nevada, but this was only a cover story. In reality, Tom spent only the weekends in Nevada. On weekdays he flew by private military jet to a top-secret government base in Alaska. The base was an 8-story building located almost totally underground. The base financed itself by setting up the world's leading drug smugglers. Officials would arrest the drug smugglers, confiscate all the money and drugs, and then turn around and sell the drugs to another smuggler, whom they would then proceed to arrest and confiscate. It sounds like a strange way to finance a scientific military research base, but it is obviously very profitable. Although not strictly legal, such practices could be justified in the name of national security, at least in some minds. Tom reported that the base was mainly a research station that nabbed up some of the best scientific minds in the country, and had the latest technology for advanced research. There were 3 major areas of research of which he was aware. Firstly, the base researched and developed biological weapons, which, as Tom said, made all other weapons seem like child's play. Secondly, the base researched and developed electronic sensory and detection devices that allowed telescopic sight through solid objects, such as walls. Thirdly, and most importantly, the base researched and developed electromagnetic propulsion devices, flying crafts which needed no fuel other than the Earth's magnetic field on which to operate. According to Tom, The ships look like UFOs, and are able to hover silently, and move at astonishing speeds. As Tom says in his own words, some of the UFOs seen over Alaska are probably ours. Tom didn't say exactly what his job at the base entailed, but he did say that the security was extremely high. Every week he was subjected to a horrible ritual. Due to the nature of his job, everything about him had to be known. He would be taken to a special room where he was dosed with sodium pentothal and put into a hypnotic trance. For a period of a couple hours, he would be interrogated into every aspect of his life for the past week. Every detail would be laid bare to make sure that there were no security leaks. This agonizing ritual was repeated every week as long as he was at the base. There were no exceptions. Tom evidently got out of the business after several years as the lifestyle was too harsh. Since he left the base he has been, and still is, under close monitoring by the government. After his release from the base, he was offered several extremely high-paying jobs by some of the country's leading corporations. Tom declined these offers and pursued a more modest job and lifestyle. So closes Tom's story, which alone could be easily dismissed. But in league with those collected by other researchers, it seems evident that the government is in possession of UFOs, and are in fact, flying them around. The following article comes from the single quote EC Technical Consultant, Nov. Dec. 1991 issue, The Death of a Journalist in West Virginia, plus the jailing of an alleged CIA computer consultant in Washington state may be elements of a much wider scandal that could have serious implications for the Bush White House in 1992. What started out as an investigation of an apparent case of pirated software has grown to be a project involving hundreds of journalists all over the world. The dead journalist, Joseph Daniel Downey Casolaro, was found dead August 10 in a motel room in West Virginia. His wrists were slashed 7 times on each wrist and a suicide note was found nearby. The only manuscript of his book, with accompanying notes, was missing. The book, provisionally titled The Octopus, was meant to be an explosive expose of misdeeds by the Justice Department under the Reagan administration. Time magazine also reported that Casolaro's research centered on gambling and attempted arms deals at the Cabazon Reservation near Indio, California, Branton. Indeed, the scope of Casolaro's investigation was so large that any one of a large number of areas of research could have been the trigger for a possible hit. While authorities declared his death a suicide, his relatives definitely stated that Casolaro's mental state was sound, indeed upbeat, after the completion of his book. Casolaro started his work nearly 2 years before, investigating the bankrupting of a small computer software company called Inslaw, allegedly by the United States Justice Department. Inslaw, a company headed by Bill and Nancy Hamilton of Washington, D.C., had developed a package known as PROMIS, short for a Prosecutor's Management Information System, to act as a case management tool for the Justice Department's unwieldy workload. Inslaw President Bill Hamilton, not to be mistaken for the well-known UFO researcher, Branton, has claimed that Ed Meese associate Earl Brian was given control of pirated versions of the PROMIS software by Meese to sell back to the United States government agencies for great profit. 2 courts have so far agreed with Hamilton, awarding an $8 million judgment, but a higher court of appeal has quashed the award and the verdict, declaring that it was not the jurisdiction of the lower courts. As of October 9, the case has moved into the realm of the Supreme Court. Earl Brian owns United Press International (UPI) and Financial News Network (FNN). According to a Washington man, who claims to have modified the COBOL-based software for the CIA and other intelligence agencies, the software was a reward for Earl Brian's role in arranging the so-called October Surprise Gambit, the alleged conspiracy to withhold the American hostages in Iran until after the 1980 election, which saw Carter removed from power. The October Surprise scandal has taken some time to emerge. In a Paris meeting, President Bush, at the time Ronald Reagan's vice presidential running mate, Branton, is alleged to have met with Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Ali Rajai, the future president of Iran, and Manucher Ghorbanifar, an Iranian arms dealer with connections to Mossad, according to Navy Captain Gunther Russbacher, who claims to have flown Bush, William Casey, the CIA chief, and Donald Gregg, a CIA operative, to that location. Russbacher, who made these allegations in May, is now in jail on Terminal Island, convicted on the charge of impersonating the United States Attorney. The Washington man is Michael Reconnaciuto, who is now waiting for a trial in a Washington jail on conspiracy to sell drugs charges which Reconnaciuto claims are manufactured. Indeed, The charge made against Riconosciuto were made 1 week after Riconosciuto authored and signed an affidavit describing his role in modifying the pirated software. The affidavit also claimed that he had been contacted by phone and threatened by Peter Vidonieks, a Justice Department employee and customs official, who Riconosciuto alleged had intelligence ties, as to the possible consequences of his going public with certain information. According to Riconosciuto, Vidonieks was a frequent visitor to the Cabazon Indian Reservation near Palm Springs and visited with tribal manager, John P. Nichols. Nichols was in essence Riconosciuto's boss in a number of enterprises conducted on reservation land, and the Promise modification was just one of these projects. According to Riconosciuto, in an interview with TC conducted from jail, the Promise software was modified to install a backdoor access for use by American intelligence services. The software was then sold to 88 different countries as a sort of Trojan horse package enabling us to access their intelligence systems. According to Riconosciuto, these countries included Iraq and Libya. Correspondence between Nichols and other companies, if authentic, indicates that Riconosciuto's claims of his expertise in the area of electronics and armaments appear to be true. Marshall Riconosciuto, Michael's father, is a reputed former business partner of Richard Nixon. According to Riconosciuto, the fuzzy status of reservation land as sovereign allowed elements of the CIA and organized crime to conduct business uniquely. Among the projects worked on during this time were joint projects with Wackenhut, a company loaded with former CIA and NSA personnel, and business ventures with the Saudi Arabian royal family and other unusual projects. A joint venture with Southern California Edison will soon be generating power for biomass drawn from local waste outlets. Biological warfare projects were investigated with Stormont Laboratories looking into the creation of pathogenic viruses and enhanced fuel-air explosive weapons, which were created and tested in league with Meridian Arms at the Nevada testing range, which matched the explosive power of nuclear devices. These enhanced weapons gained their power from polarizing the molecules in the gas cloud by modification of the electric field, a technology developed from exploring Thomas Townsend Brown's suppressed work, a knowledge which Riconosciuto claims he gained from working at Lear in Reno, Nevada. Riconosciuto is said to have worked on the enhanced fuel-air explosive weapons with Gerald Bull of Space Research Corporation. Bull, now deceased, later became an arms advisor to Saddam Hussein. It is said that Hussein possesses the PHY technology. In July, Anson Ng, a reporter for the Financial Times of London, was shot and killed in Guatemala. He had reportedly been trying to interview an American there named Jimmy Hughes, a one-time director of security for the Cabazon Indian Reservation secret projects. In April, a Philadelphia attorney named Dennis Seisman was found dead, killed by a single bullet in his chest. According to a former federal official who worked with Eisman, the attorney was found dead in the parking lot where he had been due to meet with a woman who had crucial evidence to share substantiating Riconosciuto's claims. Both Eisman's and Ng's deaths were declared suicides by authorities. Fred Alvarez, a Cabazon tribal leader who was in vocal opposition to the developments on the reservation, was found shot to death with two friends in 1981. Their murder remains unsolved. The leader of the House, Thomas Foley, announced last month that a formal inquiry will be initiated into the Inslaw case. Foley appointed Senator Terry Sanford as co-chairman of the Joint Congressional Panel. Prior to his election, Senator Sanford was the attorney representing Earl Bryan in his 1985 takeover bid for United Press International and was instrumental in appointing Earl Bryan, a medical doctor, to the board of Duke Medical School, of which Sanford is president. However, despite repeated requests from journalists to produce photographs showing Riconosciuto together with Bryan, and requests to produce his passport showing his alleged trip to Iran, he has not yet done so. Also, Riconosciuto failed to be able to describe Peter Vidonieks to CNN's Moneyline program, claiming a medical condition prevented him from remembering clearly. This led one former intelligence operative to speculate that we may be witnessing a very sophisticated intelligence operation being played out in public. Former FBI Special Agent, Ted Gunderson, speaks for Riconosciuto's credibility. Gunderson, who lives in Manhattan Beach, has worked with Riconosciuto for many years in his capacity as private investigator. Together, according to Gunderson, they were responsible for thwarting a terrorist operation during the Los Angeles Olympics. According to Gunderson, Riconosciuto was well known in certain circles as a genius in almost all sciences. The so-called drug operation broken up in Washington state was an electro-hydrodynamic mining operation, claimed Gunderson, using Townsend Brown technology. A videotape viewed by this journalist revealed metallic powders and apparent processes unrelated to drug manufacture. Indeed, a government analysis of soil samples revealed the absence of drug contamination, but a high concentration of barium. Barium is often found in high-voltage-related work. Unsubstantiated information from an intelligence source claims that the current situation is the visible effect of a war currently going on in the intelligence community between a group centered in the CIA called Aquarius, around a powerful center known as MJ-12, and a group known as COM-12 centered around naval intelligence. COM-12 is reputedly trying to sustain or guard action to sustain and preserve constitutional government and is deliberately leaking information damaging to the former group. Take note of William Bill Cooper's pro-constitutional, anti-MJ-12 writings and his past association with high levels of naval intelligence. Branton. In the same publication, same issue, there appeared a small article just following the one quoted above. Written by Thomas Z., the article, titled Walkenhut's Connection with the Black Project World, stated, the Walkenhut Company has a very close connection to the world of black budget projects. Besides being connected with the Cabazon venture mentioned in this issue, it is also responsible, according to jailed computer consultant Michael Reconociuto, for the secret projects being undertaken in Dulce, New Mexico, where the Jicarilla Indian Reservation is being similarly used. Note, the underground labs near Dulce are alleged to be tied in with the Department of Energy, Rand Corporation, DARPA, Los Alamos Labs, MJ-12, the CIA and other secret government-controlled military-industrial intelligence organizations. It is believed to be the largest underground joint interaction Illuminati/alien laboratory of its kind in the United States, and possibly the world. Branton. After sending two of my colleagues there recently and receiving confirmation that there was a top-secret military-type installation, I decided to call the newspaper office and make an educated bluff. I identified myself as a freelance reporter from Los Angeles, and told the newspaper that I was doing a story on the Cabazon Reservation biological warfare projects that had been undertaken there on behalf of the CIA. I told her that I had heard that there were similar things being done in Dulce and would like to know what was going on. The official I spoke to became frightened and said, I can't talk to you about that. It would be very unprofessional of me to talk to you about that. You'll have to speak to the president of the tribe. She then hung up. I have yet to call back and ask the president of the tribe, but will report on that in the next issue. Walkenhut is also responsible for security of a lot of underground facilities in California and Nevada, including the notorious S4 Area 51 in Nevada, where Townsend Brown flying disc technology, written about in a TC recent issue, has been flying and developing for decades. A recent helicopter crash at the area, where 2 pilots and 3 security guards from Walkenhut flying in a Messerschmitt Bo 105 helicopter were killed, was not at all accidental, claimed Reconociuto, who said that the individuals aboard the helicopter were traveling with sensitive documents. Groups are now investigating Reconociuto's claims. Commander X single quote, the anonymous intelligence military insider who has apparently fulfilled his constitutional oath by providing so much inside information on aerial and subsurface alien activity, information which in fact coincides with other accounts given by numerous other researchers, made the following comments. Note, the commander admits to being a member of a high-level intelligence network, intent on exposing the Illuminati cancer in the intelligence community, called the Committee of 12 to Save the Earth. It is not certain, however, whether or not this has any connection to the notorious COM-12 single quote. Robert Dickoff, in his book Agartha, mentions that the secret chambers of the Pyramid of Giza were connected by tunnels to the subterranean world. An Egyptian informant says that at the base of this pyramid are 3 tunnels that radiate in different directions. 2 led to dead ends, but the third seems to go on and may have once connected Atlantis with its colony in Egypt by passing under the Mediterranean and Atlantic. There are those who have suggested that some of the ancient structures near Cairo, Egypt, are in fact of antediluvian origin. Branton. 2 Swedes tried to traverse this long tunnel till its end and never returned. While believed to have died, rescue parties could not find them. This caused the government to forbid anyone from entering this third long tunnel, though they were permitted to enter the other 2. There are strange reports of ancient Egyptians, or rather, people appearing or looking like ancient Egyptians, Branton, having been seen inside the long tunnel, coming from the subterranean world. Many believe that the Swedes who disappeared joined these people. A popular book was selling in Egypt some time ago entitled The Mysterious Path to the Unknown World, dealing with the apparently endless third tunnel below the Pyramid of Giza and the world to which it leads. A report has been circulating that some scientists entered a tunnel in West Africa that ran under the ocean bed in the direction of the vanished Atlantis, which was finally reached, and many mechanical contrivances were seen through some type of window looking out into the depths. Branton on the ocean bed, including motor vehicles. How true this reporter is, the writer cannot say. The following information was sent to researcher B. Alan Walton from Juliet Sweet, a personal friend of Charula Dux, also known as Bonnie Conday, the self-professed resident of Telos, the city below Mount Shasta, and was dated February 7, 1993. Last month I had your disc transcribed and read your materials in their entirety. Very interesting, and full of well-cited facts. I appreciate your sense of groundedness when presenting your ideas. I am not familiar with the Saurian race, nor have I heard mention of them from Charula or Adama, an alleged spiritual leader in Telos, Branton. The Greys do come up from time to time, and what has been communicated by the hierarchy is that they are indeed being asked, forcibly if necessary, to leave. The ousting process has been active for the last year or so, and Adama has indicated that Los Alamos will be one of the last areas to clear out. There has been some Star Wars type of conflict of late, but they tell us not to worry about it and that they have things well in hand. Charula's age is actually 267 years. Although for surface ID purposes, she says she was born in 1951. It helps where Social Security and passport purposes are concerned. You might want to update your materials to reflect your actual age. Note, of course, the ousting process would necessitate a cessation of Illuminati interaction with the Greys, as the Bavarians have in the past allowed the Greys access to this planet and even harbored them and protected them and their bases from public or foreign intrusion. Branton, one report that came out of the Nevada military complex has not been confirmed and its exact source is uncertain. The report was based on information provided by a man who was involved in high-security work in the underground bases below the Nevada military complex. This man stated that while working at the facilities there he learned of a race of aliens which were also resident in parts of the underground bases, a group known as the Orange. The Orange are apparently a hybrid type of alien of humanoid form and possess some reptilian genetic characteristics yet with human-like reproductive organs and capable of breeding with human beings. It is also interesting that other sources apply to them a partial cybernetic quality, suggesting that they are in fact a branch of humans who have been genetically infused with reptilian DNA and also electronically or bionically altered with cybernetics. Whether or not some or all of the Orange possess a human soul matrix is something which has not yet been established, at least by the group. Since, as we've indicated earlier, evidence suggests that no true hybrid can exist between the sauroid and human races, because humans have an energy soul matrix whereas true serpent race or reptilian entities do not. Among many other dissimilar characteristics, we must assume that the entities encountered by the Nevada base worker were what one might refer to as Drac Orange, no soul energy matrix, or Ava Orange, soul energy matrix. Please bear with us in our attempts to create titles wherein none is perceived by us to exist, to describe the various new concepts which often turn up in this type of fringe research. Here we are simply applying the traditional names of the first recorded reptilian male, Draco, which, traditionally, was the father of the serpent races. And the first recorded human female, Ava, who was, traditionally, the mother of all the human races, as recorded in Genesis chapter 3, which also records the hatred and enmity that would exist between the two races down through the ages. As for the Orange, just which of the two categories these entities fall under, Draco Orange or Ava Orange or both, as we have indicated previously, remains uncertain at the time of this writing. Another account, also unconfirmed, refers to an individual possibly involved with military intelligence who was reportedly invited to work with a group of Aryans who were resident at a secret base in or near the Nevada military complex, along with secret government military personnel. This individual claimed that this group had access to UFO-type craft and utilized the symbol of the swastika, and were presently in conflict with the Greys, which they might have at one time in the past had associations with. As in the case of nearly every human organization that has established interactions with the Sauroid Grey aliens, perhaps these particular Aryans also learned of the true nature of the reptilian races after being betrayed by them. There are some Aryans that may have broken off from the Antarctican Empire, which we must assume, until evidence to the contrary presents itself, is still in collaboration with the reptilian and Grey empires, and still holds to Hitler's Nazi nightmare of a fascist electronic New World Order, complete, according to some, with human slaves bearing mind control implants inserted during abductions by joint Nazi reticulant saucer crews such as the one encountered by Betty and Barney Hill. It is interesting, however, that both the CIA as well as the Aryans are said to be operating in and below the Nevada test site, which might support allegations by some that the CIA struck a deal with the Nazis sometime before or after World War II, and that both groups have had past and present ties with the international Bavarian German Illuminati. If such an offshoot group of Aryans or ex-Nazis does exist, it might be wise for them, considering the Nazi atrocities of the past, to renounce the swastika and all that it stands for if they intend to receive any help or support whatsoever from true Americans in their conflict with the Greys. We must be careful not to equate Germans with Nazis and thus fall into the same racist trap into which the Nazis themselves fell. Nazism is a philosophical problem, not a racial one, and in fact there have been many Germans who have contributed to the overall benefit of humanity, including Luther and Gutenberg and others who challenged the despots of Rome, that is, until later generations of Germans sold themselves out once again to the so-called Holy Roman Empire via the Jesuits, who absolutely infested Hitler's SS according to Edmund Paris. This infiltration of Hitler's ranks by the Roman militia was accomplished in order to carry out the new Inquisition against the Jews, the latest in a long history of Roman persecutions against the Israelite race. Even if present Aryan generations were not personally responsible for the war crimes of their fathers during World War II, they would still have to agree to conform to constitutional principles of human equality regardless of race, religion or culture if they are to have any future peaceful coexistence with the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, the United States of America. Otherwise they might find themselves in the very uncomfortable position of being wedged between two enemy fronts, the Saurian Greys on one side and indignant anti-Nazi American patriots, many of whom lost family members to the Nazis during the Second World War, on the other. If an interplanetary or interplanetary war does erupt between human and Saurian species, as some have suggested might overtly take place in the future, then the neo-Nazi saucer groups, supposing they exist, must decide to join up with the human race and cast off their former fascist ideologies, or else try and appease the alien Greys, most likely to their own ultimate destruction, or become caught up in the crossfire between the human and serpent races and whatever future conflicts might be waged between the two. There are possible indications that at least three groups of entirely human aliens have some connection with the Nevada military complex, possibly involving humanoid aliens retrieved alive from crashed saucer disks, or human aliens who are willingly assisting certain governmental compartments in the technology department. For instance, the above account suggests that some so-called Aryans with past or present affiliation with the Antarctican Empire have some possible connection there, as well as the Pleiadian Nordics, as suggested by Robert Lazar's claim that a Pleiadian beamship was seen by him on certain occasions in the hangars. And then there are the tall Telosian blondes, who have also been known to have some connection with the underground networks of Nevada and the Southwest. In fact, there may be several different scenarios taking place at once within the test site, as if no individual compartment has full control of what is taking place there. This has been suggested by different sources. In one sense, the test site is the center of a World War III type of scenario. The only difference is that it is a covert or underground war, since neither the reptilians nor the Illuminati want this conflict to be made public, although some of the constitutionals have apparently leaked information through the Com-12 and similar intelligence organizations. The allegations, as given by intelligence sources like Yellow Fruit, indicate that some of the benevolents are operating in and below Nevada, aliens who honor a constitutional form of government in the United States. This would also indicate that there is more than one group of human-like aliens active there, and that there are in fact three general groups fighting for control: the Nordic Human Federation, the Joint Illuminati/Grey Combine, the Reptilian Empire itself. Some, however, would suggest that the joint activity groups are not a third power group at all, but rather a midpoint organization of power-hungry humans and Greys that are working together on a competitive basis in an interactive and sometimes all too real and deadly bid for world domination. Both the Illuminati and the Greys want the planet to come under central control, and both sides need each other's assistance to bring it to pass, but they disagree just who will be the ultimate masters, the humans or the Greys. Basically, it is a rather sickening love-hate relationship, or a guarded marriage of convenience. Ancient Hebrew history speaks of a race of human beings known as the Anakim, in whose sight the ancient Israelites saw themselves as grasshoppers. These giants were apparently very human, yet of enormous stature. According to some accounts they were anywhere from 9 to 12 feet tall, and remained until the Israelites eventually drove them out of Palestine. As to their final destination or what became of them, the Hebrew records are strangely silent. There are some who believe that men of such stature may have existed previous to the deluge and the cataclysms which accompanied it. However, the Hebrew records make it clear that a human race of such great stature existed in post-Diluvian times as well. Researcher Warren Smith paraphrased, in 1976, two accounts related by Leland Lovelace describing incredible finds. The following discoveries are very similar to an account which appeared in an early issue of Tull Levesque and Mary Martin's Hollow Hassle newsletter, one which described a similar cave found in the Silver Peak Range of southwestern Nevada, not far from the Mojave Desert, and in which the bones of human giants, along with gigantic stone furniture and golden artifacts, etc., was reportedly discovered. The woman who submitted the account claimed to have personally known an explorer who had been in the tunnels. The cave was supposedly discovered with the help of a Moorian treasure map which was said to have originated from a Native American tribe in the area. Warren Smith describes two similar incidents, one of which may be a confirmation of the cavern discovered in the Silver Peak Range, in the following words. Author Leland Lovelace told about such a discovery in Lost Mines and Buried Treasures, Naylor Company, 1965. Also Ace Books, New York. Lovelace said two prospectors were searching for a gold strike in the desolate mountains of southwestern Nevada. The two men were digging in the arid soil when a cave-in led them into a vast underground tunnel. Following the passageway, they went deep into the mountain and entered a large subterranean room. The two astonished prospectors held their torches high and saw that the cave was furnished with chairs and tables. The furniture was very large, as if manufactured for a race of giants. Dishes cast from gold and silver were also found on the tables. Other artifacts made from precious metals were discovered in the cavern. Lovelace did not inform his readers as to what the prospectors did with their discovery. We can assume they carried as much of the precious metal as possible from the scene, then melted down the objects for their gold and silver. This often occurs when a gold seeker finds a rare archaeological discovery. Rather than risk the treasure being taken over by the state or federal government, these men play a game of finders keepers. In 1904, a prospector named J.C. Brown claimed to have made an intriguing discovery in the Cascade Mountain Range of California. Brown had been hired by the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England to prospect for gold in these isolated areas. During his second trip into the Cascades, Brown found a man-made tunnel carved into a solid rock wall. According to old reports, a landslide had destroyed a rock wall that hid the tunnel entrance. Brown followed the enormous tunnel through the mountain and came to a large, man-made cavern. The room was lined with sheets of tempered copper. Strange circular shields hammered from gold were hung on the walls. Unusual artifacts and statues were located in niches in the cavern walls. Unusual drawings, strange art, indecipherable hieroglyphics, and the skeletons of what was apparently a giant race were found in rooms leading off from the large cavern. Unwilling to share his discovery with his English employers, Brown did not report the treasure cavern. Instead, he continued to work for various mining companies for the next 30 years until his retirement. Then, in 1934, he popped up in Stockton, California, with a map and an intriguing tale. Within a few days, 80 people were willing to assist the now aging prospector in getting the precious artifacts out of the cave. On June 19, 1934, Brown and his followers traveled into the Cascade Mountains. They camped by a small stream, waiting until morning when Brown was to show the group an entrance into the cavern. However, during the night, the old prospector vanished. He has not been seen since that night. Fearing that Brown had somehow duped the 80 people, detectives on the Stockton Police Department investigated. Brown didn't take a cent from anyone, the detectives said after the checkout. The police chief asked, what was his game? The detectives shrugged. Was he murdered out there? Asked the chief. Single quote, he was probably an old liar who knew his time was up, replied one of the detectives. Brown was a kindly old gentleman of advanced years when he arrived in Stockton, a doctor wrote several years ago. I was a curious young man at the time, always interested in occult lore. Anything that smelled of adventure grabbed my interest. Brown's stories were fascinating. They may have been tall stories about mythical things by an old man looking for companionship. Somehow, over the years, I've gained new respect for the old man. I believe he was telling the truth. I don't know his reasons, but I think he changed his mind at the last minute and decided not to reveal the location of the lost treasure vault of the Lemurian giants. In his book, There Are Giants in the Earth, Doubleday and Company, Incorporated, Garden City, New York 1974. Pages 135-136, Michael Grumley relates an ancient Hebrew tradition which suggests that remnants of a race of giants, possibly hairy giants, survived the ancient deluge along with Noah and a menagerie of other animals. In the Genesis story, there's an incident absent in the King James Version but present in various scattered references in the Hebrew Midrash, which concerns a giant named Og, who is said to have ridden on the ark during the 40 days and 40 nights of the downpour that caused Noah's flood. In order to be included in the ship's company, so the story goes, it was agreed that he would, once the ark reached dry land and the waters receded, became a servant of Noah and all of his descendants. He, and presumably a female of his kind, were the only ones of what was a widespread race of giants who perished, along with all men, except Noah and his 3 sons Shem, Ham and Japheth. This also, Hebrew tradition holds, included the 4 women who were the wives of Noah and his 3 sons, making 8 in all. Or, if the Og account is accurate, was it 10 people, 8 humans and 2 half-humans? Branton. As for the Sasquatch itself, or E.T., Bigfoot or abominable snowman, etc., in most cases they are described as being peaceable except when provoked, although such cases of retributional violence against humans are rare. It is usually said that the Sasquatch resemble not so much a missing link between humans and apes, but more of a hybrid between the two, such as a human head on an ape's body, in the words of one witness. This might suggest that humans and apes are 2 distinct species, and that in some ancient time the genetic similarity might have resulted in hybrid offspring between the 2 groups, consigning the Sasquatch offspring themselves to a horrible and lonely existence, being outcast by men and beasts alike, being that they were neither fully human nor fully animal. If such was the case in the past, the genetic divergences between the 2 groups may have long ago strayed to the point that such a natural hybrid would be impossible today, except in the case of the descendants of the Sasquatch race itself. In the book Charles Berlitz single quotes The World of the Odd and Awesome, we read of the strange being that was discovered in the Congo several years ago. He was given the nickname Oliver, however it was uncertain whether or not he was a mutant, a hybrid, or part of a new species of chimp. He looked like a bald chimpanzee, but his nose protruded much like that of a human's, and unlike apes, who prefer to walk on their knuckles, Oliver seemed to naturally walk upright. Was Oliver a Sasquatch, or of a race akin to the legendary hairy humanoid? Studied by Ralph Helfer of Burbank, California, it was discovered that Oliver had 47 chromosomes, falling between an ape's 48 and a human's 46, suggesting a crossbreed. Oliver was extremely intelligent for an ape, and enjoyed watching television westerns and action programs for hours, unlike chimps, which became bored after a few minutes. Aside from the hairy humanoids, there have also allegedly been sightings of Sotyrus-like creatures in connection with the underground or aerial phenomena, although these sightings are relatively rare. They are described as being small, goat-footed humanoids with horns. Because of the paraphysical phenomena surrounding such sightings, however, some have suggested that they might be part of a quasi-physical pre-Adamic race which were part of the original fall described in Judeo-Christian theology, a race that possessed humanoid, bestial and angelic features and therefore immortal. Whether their humanoid/animalistic attributes allowed them to procreate is uncertain. However, there are a few bizarre accounts which surface from time to time of female witches or Satan worshippers having been impregnated by Sotyrus-like incubi, following which they give birth to a horrifying hybrid, a frightening and often vicious humanoid child with horns and tail, who traditionally live only a few days or weeks before dying. This may be just a myth that has been created by occultists over the years, as no actual cadavers of these supposed hybrids has ever turned up in public. Several years ago, Brad Steiger reported an incredible incident involving a demolition crew in San Francisco, who were in the process of tearing down some old buildings when they broke into an underground cavity adjacent to the basement level of one of the old structures. They gathered together some equipment and entered the opening, and were surprised to find themselves in a tunnel which branched out in different directions underground. The construction workers commenced to explore the passages for some distance before they encountered something which left them shocked and trembling. Right in front of them stood a group of the strangest creatures they had ever seen. They were neither entirely human nor entirely like any animal they had seen before. They were humanoid, covered from head to foot with hair, were around 5 feet tall, with eyes which reflected reddish in the light of their flash beams. The demolitionists decided that they weren't going to stay there much longer, and beat a hasty retreat back to the surface. The opening might have been subsequently covered up by debris and further demolition work, although this is uncertain. Whatever may have become of the tunnel entrance is anyone's guess. Charles Berlitz, in his Atlantis, the Eighth Continent, G.P. Putnam's Sons. New York. 1984. Pages 196-198, makes the following comments concerning the ancient fallen society, which was apparently one of the first civilizations following the deluge to release the scourge of high-tech thermonuclear warfare on the Earth. He states, "These periodic destructions have occurred because Earth's inhabitants failed to carry out the plan of the Creator." According to the retelling of the Hopi legends by Frank Waters, in collaboration with White Bear, Book of the Hopi, 1968, when the ancient peoples had acquired what they wanted more still and wars began again. The peoples of the earth created big cities, nations, civilizations, and invented aircraft, patuvidas, which they used to attack and destroy one another's cities. The warfare in this previous world ceased only when continents sank and the land and sea changed places, leaving the third world, the one before the present, lying on the sea bottom, with all the proud cities, the flying patuvidas, and the worldly treasures corrupted with evil. Although the sinking of continents seems to be a phenomena intimately connected with the deluge, this does not mean that other island continents might not have sunk within the centuries or millennia following deluge as well. Branton. It is in the books of ancient India, however, that we find allusions to prehistoric warfare that eerily parallel those of today as well as those of the foreseeable future. Vide C. Berlitz, Mysteries from Forgotten Worlds. There are two possible explanations for them. Either some scientifically minded Indians of 6 or so thousand years ago let their fancies roam at will and imagined bombs of sufficient force to destroy most of the world, or perhaps the whole concept was inherited from a stage of development propitious to experimenting with or using the destructive power of the atom. In any case, passages from traditional Indian literature, such as the Vedas, the Puranas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and especially the Mahabharata, contain repeated references expressed in the poetic language of their era to aircraft, vimanas, rockets, and space travel, but also specific allusions to what is easily recognizable as combat aircraft, air bombing, radar and other forms of aircraft detection, artillery, rocket launching, explosive bullets, detonation of mines, and bombs of cosmic destruction comparable in effect to the atom bomb of the present world. In other sections of Indian scientific and philosophical literature there are mentions attesting to the awareness of molecules in atoms of different elements, a concept that might eventually lead to the use of the power of the atom in warfare, just as it has in our day within a relatively short period of time. From the time that the atomic theory was generally accepted by modern scientists to the construction of the atom bomb was only 130 to 135 years, while a previous world civilization, whose time span is unknown, would presumably have had as much or more time for such development. When the Mahabharata was to be translated in the last half of the 19th century into modern languages, into English by Pratap Chandra Roy and into German by Max Muller, the fanciful descriptions of ancient warfare were generally ignored, except in the case of artillery, familiar to everyone, an aircraft, then considered to be lighter than air. V. R. Ramachandra Dikshitar in his book on early Indian warfare, War in Ancient India, 1944, comments on the decline of artillery in medieval times, inferring that it was more destructive in the distant past. He also defends the detailed references to heavier-than-air aircraft in ancient land and naval warfare, referring to the vast literature of the Puranas showing how well and wonderfully the ancient Indians conquered the air. Since Dikshitar was writing during the period of World War I, he, like a number of Indian officers and British officers in the Indian service, was aware that many of the imaginary weapons of Indian antiquity had made an appearance or reappearance in both world wars. Dikshitar wrote, during World War I, that the Mahanastra or arrow of unconsciousness was generally considered a creature of legend until we heard the other day of the bombs discharging poisonous gases. In reference to an ancient weapon known as the Iron Thunderbolt, Berlitz states, according to the description in the Mahabharata its burst was as bright as the flare of 10,000 suns. The cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion formed into expanding round circles like the opening of giant parasols. A strangely modern injunction in the Atharva Veda cautioned opposing forces that the use of such a weapon was permissible only when the enemy used it first. There is even a mention in the Mazala Parva implying that on one occasion this weapon capable of reducing the earth to ashes had been destroyed and the resultant powder had been cast into the sea. Another timely suggestion from the distant past of Earth. Whether this legendary weapon was ever used, or was destroyed, or forgotten except in Indian literature, there exist certain burned sections of our planet that may be the result of meteor strikes or even the scars of thermonuclear warfare. One of these was found in Iraq in 1947 in the course of an archaeological probe dug vertically while penetrating a number of cultural levels containing recognizable artifacts of Babylon and Samaria, and eventually passed through a 14-foot level of clay, indicating deposits following a severe and prolonged flood. Past the flood level a stratum was eventually reached that proved to be fused glass, almost exactly similar to the desert floor at Alamogordo, New Mexico, scarred and fused after the first bomb test. General 422 states that only 7 generations after Adam, Tubal-Cain introduced complex metalwork, and no doubt weaponry, to the antediluvians. Some researchers and contactees have referred to a human group of aliens from a nearby star system who are known as the Koldasians. These may very well be the same group who others refer to as the Koldasians. UFO Photo Archives, P.O. Box 17206, Tucson, Arizona 85710 has released a volume detailing an alleged contact with a person from the planet Koldas. It is uncertain as of this writing whether or not the Koldasians, or Koldasians, are part of the alleged, although loosely tied, Vega Pleiades Andromeda Cetus Eridanus Centaurus Federation, all allegedly inhabited by human spacefaring cultures. The Koldasians however claim to have ties with the Solar Confederation reportedly based on the moons of Saturn. The volume, titled UFO, Contact from the Planet Koldas, A Cosmic Dialogue, is described as follows in an advertisement released by UFO Photo Archives. This 300-page report unfolds the story behind a powerful and special friendship still continuing between two men, one from beyond Earth. Valdar is the extraterrestrial human being who came to Earth in preparation for his commissioning as the commander of an interplanetary spacecraft. He lived near an electronics plant and worked closely with a South African national for 2 years, before departing for his home planet Koldas in another solar system. Valdar's 2 years of integrated living on a more primitively inhabited planet was one last prerequisite to his new role as spaceship commander, and he chose Earth, the unique planet a friend and mentor had also visited during his own final indoctrination. Before his final selection of our planet, Valdar had been told by his friend of Earth's rare beauty, its great variety of living species, vast oceans, high plains, abundant vegetation, and the unusual savageness of its society. After some familiarization here, Valdar met and befriended F. Edwin W., a South African working in Durban. The report tells the story of this friendship, a close relationship that has continued, up to and beyond Valdar's departure for Koldas right before the eyes of his Earth-based friend. The relationship continues today. More than 1,000 communications have been received via electromagnetic energy beams from the extraterrestrial since Valdar's departure from Earth. Many other witnesses and extensive documentation adequately support this case. Important material collected by longtime UFO researcher Carl Van Vleerden includes color photographs and an actual phonograph recording of the Koldasian commander delivering a heartfelt message to the people of Earth. This comprehensive report is published through the generosity and special interest of the Weaver family. The Unicus Group, Department 210. 1142 Manhattan Avenue No. 43. Manhattan, California 90266, an organization allegedly devoted to earthbound extraterrestrials, related much information in 1993 concerning the research and work of a Mr. Robert M. Stanley. Stanley has reportedly discovered a lost city which he says was once inhabited by ancients, whom he postulates may have been tied in with ancient Lemurians, or rather the Moorians of ancient California, a civilization which is not to be confused with the theoretical lost empire of Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, Branton. Some of the inhabitants of this ancient city were 8 feet tall and had access to interplanetary travel, utilizing an ancient UFO base. Although Stanley has been to dozens of countries doing archaeological research, he states that the lost city, which he says largely resides in a massive underground maze of tunnels and caves below a mystic mountain in Southern California, Mojave region, is the most incredible sight by far that he had ever encountered, and contains walls, statues and many other ancient relics from the ancient culture which built the city. He has allegedly taken many scientists, engineers, archaeologists and anthropologists to the ancient site and through the underground complex and states that they agree with him on the incredible importance of the site, but wonder why it never came to light before this time. Although Stanley is reticent of revealing the exact site of the Mystic Mountain, on which he also claims, along with others, to have had experiences with UFOs beaming lights down upon the group, he states that it is in Southern California, and one might assume from previous information revealed that wherever this lost city is located, it may very well have been connected in some fashion to the lost city of the Panamint Mountains. Mr. Stanley can be reached through Mystic Mountain Adventures. Department 200. 1142 Manhattan Avenue No. 43. Megabytes, California, 90266. However, be warned that Stanley is adamant in his conviction that he does not wish the site to be turned into a tourist attraction or amusement park with hot dog stands and all the rest, but desires to keep the site in pristine condition for the sake of future generations of researchers. However, if he sees that one has true unselfish academic motivations rather than a treasure hunter mindset, one might be able to arrange a tour of the site with him as have others in the past. William Halliday, in his book Adventure is Underground, records an affidavit submitted by a Mr. Earl P. Dorr, describing vast caverns he and an associate allegedly discovered and explored in Southern California. Portions of the sworn testimonial are quoted below. These caverns are about 250 miles from Los Angeles, California. Traveling over state highways by automobile, the caverns can be reached in a few hours. Accompanied by a mining engineer, I visited the caverns in the month of May, 1927. We entered them and spent 4 days exploring them for a distance of between 8 and 9 miles. We carried with us altimeters and pedometers, to measure the distance we traveled, and had an instrument to take measurements of distance by triangulation, together with such instruments convenient and necessary to make observations and estimations. Our examinations revealed the following facts, viz. 1. From the mouth of the cavern we descended about 2,000 feet. There, we found a canyon which, on our altimeter, measured about 3,000 to 3,500 feet deep. We found the caverns to be divided into many chambers, filled and embellished with the usual stalactites and stalagmites, besides many grotesque and fantastic wonders that make the caverns one of the marvels of the world. 2. On the floor of the canyon there is a flowing river, which by careful examination and measurement by triangulation we estimated to be about 300 feet wide, and with considerable depth. The river rises and falls with the tides of the sea, at high tide, being approximately 300 feet wide, and at low tide, approximately 10 feet wide and 4 feet deep. Obviously this can only mean that, if this account is true, the source of the river is an underground reservoir large enough to be moved by the tides, overflowing into the river during the high tides and receding at low tide. Branton, 3. When the tide is out there is exposed on both sides of the river from 100 to 150 feet of black beach sand, which is very rich in gold values. The sands are from 4 to 11 feet deep. This means there are about 300 to 350 feet of rich bearing placer sand, which averages 8 feet in depth. We explored the canyon sands a distance of 8 miles, finding little variation in the depth and width of the sands. 4. I am a practical miner of many years' experience and I own valuable mining properties nearby which I am willing to pledge and put up as security to guarantee that the statements herein are true. 5. My purpose of exploring the caverns was to study the mineralogy in order to ascertain the mineral possibilities and actualities of the caves, making such examination in person with my engineer necessary to determine by expert examination the character and quantity of mineral values of the caverns, rocks and sands. 6. I carried out about 10 pounds of the black sand and panned it, receiving more than $7 in gold. I sold it to a gold buyer who offered me at the rate of $18 per ounce. 2½ pounds of this black sand I sent to John Herman, assayer, whose assay certificate shows a value of $2,135.47 per cubic yard, with gold at $20.67 per ounce. 7. From engineering measurements and observations we made, I estimated that it would require a tunnel about 350 feet long to penetrate to the caverns, 1,000 feet or more below the present entrance, which are some 3 miles distant from my property. 8. I make no estimate of even the approximate tonnage of the black sand, but some estimate of the cubical contents may be made for more than 8 miles, and the minimum depth is never less than 3 feet. They are of varying depth. What their maximum depth may be we do not know. Sworn by E.P. Dorr. 309 Adena Street, Pasadena, California, November 16, 1934. It is interesting that the source of this river would be somewhere within or beneath the Great Western Desert of Utah, Nevada, California, where little surface water escapes by way of streams and rivers. Halliday in his book also refers to a water-filled cave annexed to Death Valley, known as Devil's Hole, which according to some sources rises and falls slightly with the tides. This may indicate that certain underground water courses below the Mojave Desert might ultimately connect with extensive underground lakes or small underground freshwater seas. Whether this theory proves accurate or not remains to be seen. After future adventurous spelonauts make their way once again into Dorr's secret caverns and toward the source of the alleged underground river,